I can't do it. Yes, you can. Transforming Fear. By Beyond Timeline's Introduction. Thank you for purchasing this Beyond Timeline's ebook module and welcome to what is in our view uber cool feel-good stuff. Though it has to be said that once you get to know us, you might wonder why our light sense of humor has been omitted from this module. It is because a large degree of focus and connection is required, and when setting out on the uber cool feel-good journey, all other things are distractions, and that includes our sense of humor. However, we promise that once the initial core modules have been applied, we will put lightness into forthcoming material, yet we assure you by the time you've got through this module that you will indeed feel better, more self-reliant, and more in control than you do today. This is not to say that you are out of control, on the contrary, it is a suggestion that after reading and applying this module, your life will become more meaningful, your self-esteem will grow, and your confidence will strengthen. Nevertheless, by now you may be getting a hunch as to how intense these ebook modules may be, and we unashamedly prepare you now because yes, they are very intense. Throughout they can appear heavy, and you may come to points whereby you may just want to stop, and put the whole thing down. This is normal and expected. If you come to this juncture, then by all means put it down and rest, but please abstain from throwing it out, and do make a note that once things have cooled off, you will pick it up again. This happens because when you challenge your own self, then yourself will come out to challenge you. First we come up against our own emotional and mental defenses, then we come up against the mind resisting change. However, by the time you have completed this module, not only will you have a good understanding of how human dynamics work, you will be gaining a large degree of control over your own inner dynamics. Though being brutally honest, it has to be said that engaging with and transforming our own human dynamics can be quite a challenge, yet here's the truth. Once engaged and applied, which in a general sense can be weeks, months to a year, then real magic begins to happen. Not wishy-washy, namby-pamby unquantifiable stuff, but genuine positive change and improvements for the better. Though what do we mean by real magic and miracles? When read with intent to digest, the material within shifts the cogs and gears of the inner self. The upshot is that your entire life and reality begin to project and reflect these shifts, and on occasions reality provides a quantum leap that to the naked eye looks like miracles. So where did we get this material from? Well, let's keep that until you read the modules. Yes, we said modules because there is more than one. But do not worry because they are all brought to you with affordability in mind. With that being said, take some comfort in the knowledge that the module presented before you has been compiled with the utmost diligence. In our view, it is quality material distributed affordably. Meaning that, for 10 years we really did work with high-ranking individuals, CEOs, middle managers, and everyday people. And you will directly benefit from their raw experiences and input. Each module has real facts and figures, and while the following makes no difference to your reading, we did not put these modules out until they were proven to unanimously work with consistency and reliability. And now on to the goal of this module. The goal: when you think of the word fear, what is the first thought that comes into your mind? Fear is mostly thought of as a frightener and something that should on all occasions be avoided. However, the ultimate aim for this module is to show and guide how to cultivate the energies and forces of fear in a way that will produce preferable and uplifting outcomes. This module has 3 key goals. 1. To identify, unearth and dissolve inner fear. 2. To discover how to transform the energy of fear without the need to physically live it out. 3. To do what the title suggests. That is, approach everyday life with a real inner can-do attitude that contributes to a feel-good existence. Section 1. The dynamics of fear. Rarely does it come into our mind, though that the core forces driving human existence. Fear and love. There are only ever 2 options for every single thing we do in life. Either something is being avoided or attracted, with either fear or desire at the core. While desires serve as attractors, fears are generally avoided, and rarely is there any conscious awareness of these inner dynamics. When confronted with the prospect of fear, as humans we naturally disown it. It is a very different story at the opposite end of the scale. That is, people rarely have a problem voicing their life's desires. It may now come as a surprise to know that fear has the ability to cloak and disguise itself into the energy of desire. What may be thought of as an outright desire is most likely a core fear overlaid with a surface desire. Does that sound confusing? Please allow a brief explanation. For a moment, imagine a roller coaster. You fear this amusement ride, and this fear is a conscious one. In other words, at the first thought of boarding the ride, avoidance would most likely be the obvious choice. However, now consider that the roller coaster is only a trigger to feel the feelings of fear, and it is not the source of fear itself. When we say trigger, it means just that. The trigger sets off the feeling of fear or excitement, but it is not the core of destruction. Now imagine the point whereby you experience the fear. If like most, fear will surface before embarking upon the ride. Why yet for others, instead of experiencing and feeling fear, the very same adrenaline rush invokes the opposite. That is feelings of excitement, desire, love and happiness. Yet, how can this be? Does common sense and rational logic not suggest we should all feel the same things from the same experiences? Has it ever crossed your mind that fear and desire could indeed be the same energy? We will seek to uncover that both fear and desire are partners and operate from exactly the same core fear. That is, the excitable thrill-seeking adrenaline junkie, and the fear-ridden, panic-stricken, anxious individual are experiencing the same core energy called fear. However, and going back to the roller coaster, as already outlined, the roller coaster is only a trigger to feel and is not the root cause of the feeling. In other words, the roller coaster acts like a light switch, turning the power on and off, but it is not the source of electricity. Though we will get to the source later, for now, consider that the roller coaster serves only as a trigger to invoke a basic human dynamic of either love or fear, which can also be thought of as a desire or dislike, avoid or attract, go towards or away from, etc. This is easily identified with roller coasters as there are generally only two options. That is, one either feels fear, or excitement, and the energy dynamic is the same. So where does the disguising and cloaking of fear come into it? Well, again, we will uncover this later. However, decisions performed by the conscious mind are born not from the conscious mind, but originate from deeper within. For those who experience an adrenaline rush of excitement and desire, most likely have core fears overlaid with positive desires. In other words, it would be deemed rational and reasonable to feel a degree of fear from a roller coaster ride, but not excessive fear or excitable desire. Both excessive fear and excitable desire are real-life indicators of core fears, with the only difference being in their outward expression. Too much unprocessed fear bleeds through as fear, while mild unprocessed suppressed fear bleeds through as desire. Have you ever come across a person that at first appeared so full of desire, enthusiasm, and positivity, only to find that one day the very opposite happened? In other words, their reality crashed and burned, and they were the least likely candidate. This is the result when unprocessed fear becomes overlaid to the degree it can no longer contain itself. That is, when fear accumulates to a given level, and that given level is subjective. This human dynamic, like all things, has a cut-off, a point whereby it can no longer suppress. It therefore begins to bleed through. The result is desire, followed by excessive desires, followed by crash. The crash is natural because this is the simple human dynamic functioning normally and trying to rebalance and rectify itself. Once this human dynamic is understood, the crash is so inevitable, so predictable, it can be likened to sitting on a rail track knowing the train is on its way. The fear dynamic is very basic. Processed fear does not bleed through and is processed on the spot. Unprocessed fear bleeds through as desire. Suppressed unprocessed fear bleeds through as fear. Through our own studies, the understanding is such that the dynamic of fear operates with such simplicity, more often than not it is grossly overlooked. The outcome being that, unnoticed and unprocessed fear really does go on to manufacture more fear. In turn this creates a reality of insecurity, low self-esteem, stress, frustration, depression, anxiety etc. If left unattended, physical manifestations such as anxiety, panic attacks, and in extreme cases, suicide result. Fear cloaked as desire. Have you ever come across a person that states they fear not, does not experience depression, and projects positivity about all things in life? These people can come from any walk. They may be a construction worker, a very successful business person, a housemaid, even a life coaching mentor, etc. However, their position matters not in comparison to what drives them. Fear is one side of the energy spectrum, while desire is at the other. Commonly referred to as a polar opposite, it could be said that fear is far left, desire is far right, and balance in the middle. In the middle state, both fear and desire can be perceived and immediately processed, yet go far left towards fear, and more fear is manufactured, while far right goes into desire. The above may sound complicated, but it really is very simple. That is, all human energy has a state of balance, referred to as a state of rest. Resting means a state of not doing one thing or another, normally called balance. Think of human energy like that of a set of scales. In other words, there is only ever this way or that way, with a state of balance in between. Place a small amount of something on the left and naturally it gravitates to the left. Place something on the right, and according to the amount, the balance will shift. Take everything off and the scales will return to a natural state of balance. Human energy and the dynamics can be thought of in a similar way. That is, imagine fear to be on the left, and desire to be on the right, with neither fear nor desire in the middle. The more fear one has, the more their scales tip to the left, and vice versa. The more desire one experiences, and their scales will tip to the right. Yet, here is one of life's great paradoxes. The right scale of desire can be guised and cloaked fear from the left. While this might sound confusing, there is a perfectly rational explanation. Imagine scales with nothing on them, they are in a state of balance, right? Now imagine loading the left scale, then loading the right scale with equal amounts of something. It would return to a state of balance, right? Now imagine the equally loaded left and right, but we now further increase the load on the right, the scales would tip further right, yet the original load from the left would still exist. Now imagine a man named Barry was birthed into a world of fear, whereby his own left scales become laden with fear. Yet, to counteract and maintain a civil reality, Barry's overall consciousness one begins loading the right side with desires. Eventually a state of balance is reached, albeit this balance is illusionary. Nevertheless, balance is the outcome. Yet, in order to maintain and strive for a good existence, Barry's subconscious keeps loading the right side with desires. Eventually, the right becomes overloaded with desires, and Barry now experiences himself and life as an adrenaline, thrill-seeking junkie. Nevertheless, this does not mean he is free from core fears. In fact, and on the contrary, his core fears are 100% intact, unknowingly driving his life and reality from his subunconscious. If, like Barry, one was birthed into a feared environment, then naturally their operating platform tips and builds a life based upon the left scale of fear. Though it will be discussed later, overall consciousness makes an informed decision to get away from a reality of fear. That is, no human being can, or ever does remain in a permanent state of fear. At times it may appear so, nevertheless, the reality is that all human energy is in a constant state of flux, and the inner subtle self already knows that a life filled full of surface fear would be disastrous to say the least, so it cleverly gets to work with a set of desire overlays. In other words, when a fear is encountered, the inner aspect of self automatically plugs into polar opposite energies and gets to work creating what it thinks you desire. These operations are performed silently, and away from one's immediate awareness. This human dynamic works similar to that of normal daily life. That is, imagine you want to say something negative to a person but you feel that it may be taken the wrong way. What do? Generally speaking, what it is you want to say gets cloaked and coated in something else. That way, when a negative connotation is suggested, surface reality conveys one thing, while subtle reality is conveying something else. This is done not just for etiquette's sake, but because when any disharmony is created, overall consciousness automatically does its best to avoid. Now, it may surprise you to discover that when we interact with ourselves, the very same game is going on. Albeit we are not conscious of this inner dynamic, nevertheless it works the same way. In other words, when you feel something fearful, there is a deeper aspect of yourself that interacts with yourself, and it knows that to live in a permanent state of fear is destructive. Therefore, and without your conscious knowledge, your overall consciousness interacts with your own dynamics, instructing your conscious mind to move away from fear. Why does the human energy system not put up with permanent states of fear? Because fear is destructive, and the ultimate destruction is non-physical existence. The purpose of overall consciousness is to not only exist, but to progress and strive forward. Therefore, from an overall point of view, overlaying fears with desires is an entirely natural operation. The opposite of fear is desire, so to get you as far away from fear as possible, the polar opposite energy of desire is automatically pursued. This is how and why fears become overlaid with desires, yet at the core, fear still resides. The ultimate dynamic of fear, it has already been outlined that fear has the ability to cloak, giving the appearance of desire, yet there is more. The ultimate dynamic of fear is such that 99.9% of all core fears are going on unnoticed. Please make a note, we said core fears and not the surface fears felt crossing a 4-lane freeway, or the immediate fear felt watching a horror movie. Although it will be discussed later, core fears are different in so much that rarely are they recognizable on the surface. Nevertheless, and once a little digging around is underway, identifying, unearthing, and distinguishing core fears is as effortless as reading these words. The upside being that when core fears are dissolved, then a truly remarkable personal transformation gets underway. While we will attempt to set aside mind-boggling science, there is great value in developing knowledge that all life and reality comes down to a vibration. Everything you taste, touch, smell, see, hear, perceive is a sound vibration. Furthermore, and well worth a note, is that the human energy of fear is also a vibration known and recordable in hertz. When resonating in the fear frequency, then naturally this human dynamic emits and radiates a pulse that sends and receives more of the same. If you like, think of it as all fears are buddies broadcasting on similar wavelengths, and when you pulse out your signal of fear, it tells other buddies of fear where it can feed from. Though slight ambiguity surrounds the actual electromagnetic frequency range of fear, there is confidence that science will settle on quantifiable numbers sometime soon. However, did you spot the shift from the word fear to a hertz, to a sound frequency? Though like humans cannot hear the sound frequencies bats chat, the frequencies of fear cannot be heard by the human ear either. Nevertheless, it is still a sound vibration recordable in hertz, and it is real. The day will soon arrive whereby quantifiable proof conclusively highlights fear as a changeable vibration. Meaning that all human fear is open to change. Exactly what is meant by fear as a changeable vibration? Well, in our own studies, it came to light that 99.9% of all participating individuals appeared to have been birthed into hidden fears, which then went on to unknowingly drive their lives. Yet, with conscious development and the dissolution of core fears, their reality turned around for the better. That is, when the core is weeded out, dealt with and dissolved, then there is no desperate desires, and consequently no impending fears. Roughly translated into life and reality, it means peace and happiness. The reality is as follows: being free of your own interpersonal insecurities, being free from your own self-doubt, being free from personal frustration and worry about the future, not slaving to your own self and your own reality. Can you imagine being free from the drive of passion, and still getting what you desire? Can you imagine what it is like to really and genuinely love yourself? Can you imagine knowing what your life and reality is about, i.e. your purpose? Can you imagine that? The above are states of being that have been carefully monitored and collated from our long-term social studies. Ranging from periods of between 2 and 5 years, the above are common denominators that each and every individual concluded they experienced. It may surprise you to know that in over 10 years of intense social studies, not one individual was found to be operating free from core fears. Unknowingly operating on your behalf, and silently preventing access to inner core fears, is a very sophisticated human ego. While the ego has a sound and constructive role to play, it is the negative aspect that interferes and keeps all core fears hidden. However, as the ego is not responsible for the creation of core fears, its role has been justifiable in preventing access. Nevertheless, this solution was always temporary, a type of band-aid over the cut, so to speak. There is a reality that core fears are fully intact, operating from the core of the self, and until dealt with, they will go on to produce personal insecurities, worries, anxieties, and so forth. Though it is detailed later, yet to gain access to hidden core fears, one is required to challenge and then turn off their own dynamic of defense, resistance, and beliefs. That is through one's perception. For the computer-minded, it's a little like accessing a hidden partition on a hard drive. As you may already know, access requires adequate programming knowledge. Accessing the building blocks of human dynamics is much the same. Yet, it is overall consciousness that is the decision maker as to whether a person is ready to enter and begin tinkering around with their own energy dynamics. Section 2, The Origins of Fear in a General Sense. As the conscious mind finds difficulty in recalling memories from earlier than around 5 years old, it is virtually impossible to be absolutely specific where personal fear began. However, it is now understood that for certain individuals fear appears to be pre-installed from birth. From our own studies of parents with similar children, raised in similar environments, collated data has shown that each child responds and reacts very differently. As an example only, Lee's firstborn was like most other babies. Craig responded and reacted as normal. 2 years later and Lee's second child Nathan came along, who also appeared to respond and react normally. However, as time went by, and both boys began to grow, it was apparent that they were as different as chalk and cheese. That is, Craig was evidently confident, self-assured, and radiant. On the other hand, slightly younger brother Nathan, who was equally as cute, displayed quite the opposite. For no apparent reason, he displayed a lack of self-confidence, low self-esteem, and in general he was less secure than his elder brother. Had it not been for intimately close analytical studies, deeming Nathan's behavioral and differences as normal childhood personality traits, could have been quite natural. Nevertheless, as Nathan developed, it became blatantly obvious to Lily that there was more than normal behavior going on. Highly concerned, she took Nathan to see a medical doctor. What follows is their diagnosis. Aged 2, Nathan's behavior was deemed normal. Aged 3, Nathan's behavior was deemed normal. Aged 4, Nathan's behavior was deemed normal. Aged 5, Nathan's behavior was deemed normal. Nevertheless, and in no way undermining clinical analysis, What we will now discover is that the above is so highly inaccurate, and that Nathan's behavior is a direct result of some form of pre-programmed fear. From birth, Nathan displayed a type of resistance to life. Though difficult to detect and often overlooked, but once worked back from 5 years to 4, to 3, 2, 1, and back to his birth. Connecting Nathan's dots was not so difficult. From birth, and for no apparent reasoning, during the night, Nathan would cry more than the average. From birth, Nathan would tantrum more than the average, eventually developing into major resistance. From birth, Nathan's appetite was minimal to sufficient, which in turn led to being underweight. Aged 2, he developed a mild skin disorder, which over time progressed to a serious case of eczema. Aged 3, Nathan's resistance evolved into aggression. The outcome being physical violence towards his older brother and parents. Aged 4, Nathan began to display tics. His behavior worsened with public bouts of anger, and undressing himself outside. Aged 5, Nathan was now displaying, infrequently banging his head off the wall, table, or any object. Rolling his eyes in his head, spasmodically shaking his head, which became more severe when he began school. Screams in the morning, will not get up, will not eat food and goes out the door without any food at all. Takes his clothes off in outside, particularly on the way to school. Repeats the same swear word 20 to 30 times in a row. Throws the TV controller, Xbox controllers at the TV screen or at his older brother. Will not sleep before 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. and then goes to his parents' bed during the night. Has severe skin allergies all over his body. Is grossly underweight. Is the above really normal? According to the American II Center for Disease Control and Prevention, almost 1 in 10 children suffer from ADD. That's almost 5.5 million children in the USA currently growing up with difficulties in their neurological processing. Furthermore, the CDC stated the following: 3. ADD is a serious public health problem affecting a large number of children and adults. Though, please do not assume that behavioral problems are restricted to the poorer underclasses. For Ian Graham, headmaster of Slindon College, an independent boys' boarding school near Arundel, West Sussex, has 20 out of 100 pupils diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and a few more with related diagnoses such as oppositional defiant disorder. To recap, CDC state 10% of us children have ADD, see Endon 02. Slindon College UK state 20% of their pupils have ADD, footnote 4. Woolrich and colleagues' study found that teachers' screening of elementary pupils gave a higher estimate of 25%, footnote 5. In the 5 Diagnosis and Management of ADD in Children, Young People and Adults National Clinical Practice Guideline number 72, published by the British Psychological Society, states the following: 75% of ADD is passed through parental DNA. ADD costs the USA an estimated $42.5 billion used. Now, that's just ADD. ADD is mild in comparison to more developed disorders such as tics, Tourette's and or depression, but remember Nathan was diagnosed as normal. According to 6 varying reports, 1% of British children will be diagnosed with Tourette's, 3% with OCT, 5% with tics, 13% with anxiety, and 20% with ADD. In the UK, that's as much as 2.4 million, and in the USA, that's over 15 million kids all growing up with a stress-related disorder. Now consider that these children grow up, and have offsprings of their own. That is, just like Nathan, a newborn starts life with a genetic imbalance. It is said that while growing up, a total of around 30% of all Western children experience stress, which climbs to 50%, even 75% when entering adulthood. According to the 7 American Institute of Stress, 75% to 90% of all visits to the doctor are stress-related. The point being that stress accounts for an incredible amount of disorders. Why yet to be accepted as normal childhood behavior, or as everyday life is perhaps the grossest misunderstanding of mankind. That is, as children develop into adulthood, misunderstood energy imbalances worsen. The progression could go something like this: normal misbehaving child tics Tourette's or OCD anxiety panic attacks depression manic depression 8 suicide. Now work that backwards. Suicide is the result from an inability to cope. The inability to cope is the result from internal depression frustration. Depression frustration is the inability to deal with anxiety, panic, worry, which is the result of psychological imbalances. Psychological imbalances are the result of genetic and chemical imbalances, but most of all, psychological imbalances stem from fearful thoughts and feared thinking. Fearful thought and thinking stem from real-life dislikable experiences. These can be current yet are most likely past already experienced events. Now, do you remember earlier it was highlighted that in a general sense, recalling memories earlier than 5 years old was almost impossible? There are a number of scientifically proven reasons for this, though what's vitally important is to brain glands. The amygdala, an almond-sized gland responsible for fear and stress. The hippocampus, responsible for the formation of long-term memory, which gives the ability to rationalize fear and stress. Though when young, it is the non-amygdala gland that thinks, and stores relevant emotional memories, while long-term memory forms in the hippocampus gland. Though let's not get lost in technical jargon, only to outline that the amygdala gland is responsible for fear. In a published paper from 10 The Scientist 15/19:20, by Harvey Black, he stated that the amygdala performed a critical boost for long-term memory of emotional events. Roughly this translates to storing childhood trauma. No matter how young, the brain appears to store it. That means, even if events from 2 to 3 years could not possibly be recalled, the brain is capable of storing unprocessed emotional content. Babette Rothschild, The Body Remembers, 2000, outlines the relationship between the hippocampus and the amygdala. She states that when young, the amygdala is mature enough to process emotional data, but the hippocampus, which rationalizes then stores long-term memory, is not. This is vitally important information because the suggestion is that while events cannot be remembered, their emotional associations can be. In layman's terms, it can go something like this: at only 18 months old, baby Nathan could not remember the TV plane crash, and his hippocampus was not capable of rationalizing, making sense of, or processing the event. Yet his amygdala gland stored the emotional reaction he had to that event. If he experienced fear, then that would be locked in and recalled by the sub-unconscious to any similar associated future event. This explains why when Barry becomes an adult, he may dislike plane journeys, and not know why. Furthermore, the stored unprocessed fear becomes a core fear, which then gets overlaid with desirable, or positive events, and soon enough, hey presto, he has no conscious memory of it. Nevertheless, until it is raised to the surface mind and consciously processed, then it sits in the sub-unconscious, driving his life from a platform of fear. However, there is one more source of inherited imbalances. That is, the phenomenon whereby an individual is able to recall experiences and events that are beyond this life. While we are not suggesting knowledge or quantifiable proof of any form of past life, what cannot be ignored is a human's ability to process unexperienced material. That is, in our own studies, every individual has with guidance been able to pull forward and consciously relive experiences that they have not encountered in this lifetime. In doing so, and once relived, the experience faded yet left a remarkable footprint on their present life and reality. The new footprint is inner peace and contentment. Though, while there is recognition that these words may appear futile and flaky, the power in living from and being these words, and not in just reading, are truly astonishing. That is, imagine an existence without inner insecurity, trivial worries, and panicky fears. Well, There is no need to keep imagining, as the purpose of this module is to identify, unearth, and dissolve all core fears. Section 3, The Drivers of Fear. We have already said that fear is at the core, but what is driving it? While the medical fraternity might declare chemical imbalances to be the main contributor towards fear, and indeed, they do. However, behind biology, is chemicals. And behind chemicals is what? What is it that's fueling and maintaining the human being? And what is the stuff that keeps the heart beating? Well, it may surprise you to discover that consciousness is what creates and maintains life. It is said that consciousness is the core of existence, and without it, nothing could ever exist. Though, due to word constraints, consciousness is covered in its own module. Yet, for the time being, let us just familiarize ourselves with this word, and its role in reality. As without conscious awareness, life does not exist, because consciousness is required for you to become you. Additionally, and when given some thought to, consider that a person is only ever considered deceased when their heart stops beating. This is the point whereby the deceased is not only unconscious, but their consciousness has completely gone. Put another way, think of a light. Not a light bulb, but the actual light that shines from it. Electricity is required to power that light, and without it, the light is not a light, right? While this is an analogy only, consciousness is similar to the light, in so much that without it, as a human being, you cannot possibly be you. Please take some time out to give this some careful thought. That is, whatever and however it is referred to, that is God, spirit, intuition, or otherwise. The indefinable stuff that binds you together we call consciousness. However, while consciousness is required to make you, you, and in some respect consciousness is fueling core fears, it is doing so subunconsciously. This brings us neatly onto many proposed theories that humans are not separate individuals, on a random journey of a purposeless, unfathomable life, but are in fact fragments of consciousness experiencing itself through yourself. That is there any possibility that you have somehow split from the unity, left the whole, become a perceived individual, and to make it real, during that illusionary separation a construct called fear was created? We do not know the answers, but what we do know is how to dissolve the dynamics of fear. Later we will come back to this, but for now, let's spark it with the understanding that consciousness creates. While consciousness may create, and it is needed to fuel fear, the drivers of fear are coming from the subunconscious. Still work in progress, though it appears that consciousness must evolve to a level of perceptual awareness in order to understand itself. That is, for the average human being, core fear cannot be easily accessed. However, just because it resides in the subunconscious does not mean hypnotherapy, or altered states of being are needed to get at it. On the contrary, and as we will discover later, all core fear can be readily accessed using everyday wakeful awareness. Though what is the driving force behind all hidden core fears? It has been discovered that associated experiences along with perception are the main culprits. Please allow a quick explanation. First of all, let's briefly explain what an associated experience is. An associated experience is a real-life past event/experience, most likely from childhood, that has created and embedded an automatic response. Responses can be described as knee-jerk reactions, yet as they do not always come from the conscious self, then identifying them takes a little patience. Nevertheless, fear is created by something that is seen with the eyes, heard by the ears, tasted by the tongue, touched by the skin, smelled by the nose, and then perceived by intuition. In other words, when little Nathan sees the TV plane crash, this may not be enough to generate fear. Yet, if he sees, or hears something that links his life to that event, then a fear link is made. This is what's called an associated experience. However, there is more. If little Nathan perceives the event as good, then it will register as a desire. If he perceives it as bad, then it will register as a fear. and if he does not perceive any significance, then it will not register at all. Though please bear in mind, that it's not just sight alone that creates core fears. If you place your hands in a dark cupboard and something furry crawls over it, then the mind automatically searches for past relevant associated experiences. In a general sense, the mind will come up with moving furry thing equals spider equals fear, only because the mind has learned it previously. However, the mind is clever because it can use a sight experience as a touch experience. In other words, it could see a spider on TV, and then perceived that experience through any of the other four senses. Though, when the box is opened, any fear felt would quickly turn to laughter when what was thought to be a hairy spider was in fact a feather duster. While we understand this is very basic, this is exactly what is catching most humans out. That is, the mind pictures and sends feared signals first, but it's not always correct, and day in, day out, the mind is sending these incorrect messages. It's a little technical why the mind does this, yet we will attempt to be as brief and as simple as possible. Imagine starting life from a blank slate of new experiences and there is nothing in the memory bank at all. As the very first experience has nothing to compare itself against, it must make a decision. The decision is very basic, either it likes, or dislikes something. If what it sees, hears, touches, tastes, or smells is perceived as good, then an electromagnetic impulse creates an associated emotional memory that locks into place. In a physical sense this is called a neuron, which then goes on to influence similar future experiences. For example, if little Nathan perceived the TV plane crash without linking their experience, then it is quite likely the event would not hold any relevance and would be quickly forgotten. However, it is not forgotten, and gets stored as a core fear only when one of the five senses, that is sight, sound, taste, touch and smell, along with perception, make a decision that the experience is emotionally not good. Yet, what do you think influenced perception to make that decision of perceiving something to be not good? Well, we could relate to it as intuition, yet what we are really referring to is one's overall consciousness. In other words, it is the stuff spoke of earlier that creates, and maintains you being you. However, let's not boggle the mind only to outline that there are dynamics in action, that whether consciously understood or not, are in operation anyway. However, you need not be too concerned about this because as we will discover later, when worked backwards, all core fears can be broken apart and dissolved. In doing so, is a little like taking the brakes off a car and the individual in question is free to do and create whatever they desire without obstacles or frustrating challenges. Section 4. The effects of fear. It could be said that fear is perhaps the most debilitating and life-crushing of all human energies, yet paradoxically, it is also the least accepted, least embraced, and most feared. Yes, ironically fear is feared. Though why is this so? Because like all human energy, there is a commonly known principle that like attracts like, right? Well, yes and no. While it is true that positive people go on to attract positive things and wealthy people appear to attract more wealth, yet when we look into the dynamic of fear, we find it is not just a case of like attracting like. It has been noted that wealthy and genuinely positive, happy, peaceful people are experiencing these states because they are not driven by hidden core fears. If they are not driven by fear, then what is it that's driving them? Well, you may guess it to be desire. As desire is the known polar opposite to fear, it could be said that happy successful individuals are living out a life of desire, and not a life founded upon fear. Nevertheless, please prepare yourself for a revelation. As it is our suggestion that ultra-successful, and we don't mean financially, but happy, content, relaxed, magnetizing individuals that appear to sail through life are not living from a platform of fear or desire, but instead they are in a state of preferring. It does not mean they are immune, or are completely free from fear, but it does mean that they are not unconsciously driven by it. Often it is said that the difference between success and failure is not a lack of hard work, determination, financial backing, or otherwise. When dreaming of the ultimate desired life, it is not for the lack or amount of desire, and when any thought of moving forward springs into mind, it is not down to a lack of vision. So what makes you, you? As from 10 years of international in-house social studies, results strongly indicate that a person's existence in life and reality could well be a direct reflection of their own inner fear. That is, as much as this may be resisted, rejected and disowned, life could indeed be the direct effect of fear in so much that the quality of your life depends largely upon the amount of hidden and embedded core fears. Though this may be a bitter pill to swallow, the end result of fear, or better stated, the effect of fear is who and what you are today. To help with this, there is a very simple test one can perform on the self. Ask yourself the following, but please be as truthful to yourself as you possibly dare to with the answers that arise. Are you truly living the life you would prefer to live? Are you free from inner turmoil and insecurity? Are you truly happy and content with your life? If you truly answer yes to all three, then please put this module down and carry on doing what it is you are already doing. Though if like most, the answer is no, then continue on with the trust that this module will at the very least have a positive transformational impact upon your life and reality. So for now, let's keep this section brief, and move on to the practical side of dealing with and dissolving core fear. Are you ready to enter the center of your own being? Section 5, Unearthing, Unlocking and Dissolving the Root Core of Fear. Now we have reached the section of doing, and this is where we will begin the journey of unearthing, unlocking and dissolving core fears. The outcome of which that when free of core fears, the gap is naturally filled with the polar opposites of positively productive energies of what it is you prefer in life. Can you truly imagine what it is like to operate from a platform of preferences, and not doubt, and can you imagine waking up daily in a state of security free from niggling fears? Step 1, Observing Fear. Step 1 is to observe, and it means just that, observe. Beginning this journey does not mean judging, opinionizing, assessing, or any other form of critical analysis. Just like when you would observe another, perhaps like that of people watching. It simply means to take one step back, quietly and without questioning, do your very best to just observe yourself. However, in doing so, prepare for your own inner dynamics such as defense, resistance, and self-criticism to jump out and get in the way. We say jump because up to present day, the role of your inner dynamics have been to snap into action as and when required. In fact, they often perform their knee-jerk tasks even when they are not required to do so, but as they operate from the sub-unconscious, this has been their duty. Yet, for a time being we are going to politely but authoritatively ask these to step aside and allow access to what's beyond. We do this to gain access to sub-unconscious material that in general is hidden away from the conscious mind. Though we like to term it access to the bank vault, for this is where your true wealth and power reside. Nevertheless, this is not about therapy, hypnosis, or mind psychology. What is about to happen is performed in everyday awakened states of consciousness. Though, before we begin, it may help to imagine yourself as an aeroplane. That is, millions of parts go to form an aeroplane, the same way trillions of cells bind together and make up a human being. Albeit the plane is largely made up of metal and humans made of biological cells, their atomic structure is not too dissimilar. That is, the plane would not be a plane without sections, subsections, and millions of individual pieces binding together. Just like humans would not be humans without having sections and subsections of trillions of single cells. Now imagine the plane requires a pilot, a co-pilot, and passengers. Just like you require the conscious, sub, and unconscious mind. Now imagine that all along and up to present day, you have been a passenger in your own plane. That is, your plane, which is your human body, has to date been piloted, and co-piloted by something else. However, as the passenger and up to present, you have been enjoying the journey, though not really knowing the route or the destination you are heading. In other words, you have been in your body, doing life, heading somewhere, but not 100% certain of the direction, or destination. Now imagine being on the plane, and the stewardess informs you that the co-pilot is experiencing a predicament. However, he sends his reassurance that this is not an emergency, all things are under control, and all that is required is for you to join him in the cockpit, slip into position and begin observing. As you leave your seat for the last and final time, you come to the realization that your role as the passenger is over. As the plane now needs you, no longer can you sit back experiencing the ride. Nevertheless, and without alerting the other passengers, you must calmly and confidently take up your position of observing. However, as the cockpit is a highly secured, restricted area, to enter, an access code is required. In other words, think of the pilot being your conscious mind, the co-pilot being your subconscious self, and the passenger being the unconscious mind/self. To access these areas, also requires codes, but the good news is that requesting human dynamics to step aside is a relatively easy task. What we are now going to do is instruct the conscious mind to go off, talk to the sub-unconscious and ask for access into your command center. That is, you are going to ask for access to all hidden core fears that operate largely from the sub-unconscious. Though it matters not which part of consciousness they operate from, sub, or unconscious, as long as they come forward. They will come forward because, like pressing in the correct access code for the cockpit door, the door will open regardless who types the correct code in. In a relaxed and fully conscious state, find a quiet area to sit and engage with yourself. This is better performed in the evening before sleep, and once again before rising, yet it can be done at any time, anywhere, as long as you can engage with your inner self. Now directly ask your own consciousness to engage with the self. Not just your mind, but with your overall self. First attempt might feel odd, and it's normal to feel a little self-foolish. This is just our own inner dynamics chugging away in reaction mode. Allow it to be that, but also put it to one side and continue regardless. Now ask your consciousness to go off and search for the root of all your core fear. Outline that there is no timeline, meaning no rush. The following question would be posed to the conscious mind. Irrespective of my surface fear, current beliefs, or outcome, I desire to know the core of my fears, more than I desire not to know. I am fully prepared and accept full responsibility in dealing with and processing with what arises, and I genuinely seek to know, understand and dissolve my own core fears. I now in this moment, give my conscious self a clear directive to go off, search and find the root core of my core fears. I ask that irrespective of my current perception, beliefs, conscious, sub or unconscious, any stored emotions, and my conscious and unconscious intentions, that you set aside my own individual thoughts and opinions to locate and raise these associated experiences to my conscious mind for processing. I ask that you do this now. While this may appear to be oversimplistic, it is not. It is the reality of reality. Therefore, please do not underestimate this, because at the subtle levels of reality, in particular, at the dynamics of quantum electromagnetics, all hell is breaking loose. This is not meant in a religious context, but in applying the above, sets off the most powerful chain reaction which will without doubt and in due course, filter through to your reality. Though please bear in mind this is not a magic potion either, and this is to gain access only. Do not make the mistake in assuming this one-off exercise will redeem every embedded core fear, as it will not. Yet, what it will do is acclimatize and allow access to untapped and untouched areas of the self. Doing the above flips your own conscious mind from "it happened to me" to observing something happening to you. It is said that consciousness is human's form of light, So please remember that your awareness can be likened to the light shone from a torch, and wherever you direct that light is where your conscious attention goes. What you are seeking to do, is self-reflect without questioning. So, going back to the plane analogy, imagine you have just been given access to the cockpit, you have taken up position and found that the co-pilot has been flying the plane all along. Imagine the co-pilot seat was always empty and that it was waiting for you. Are you going to interfere, make judgments, or cast personal opinions advising the co-pilot how to fly the plane? Of course, he is a co-pilot and already has much flying experience, right? So, what are you going to do? Well, you are already wise enough to know that hands-off observation mode is critical, and it is critically important that you adopt this same principle when observing yourself. Step 2. Observing fear. Now that you have defined your self-observation mode, please continue the above exercise on a daily basis until it is etched into your system. In a general sense, this takes around 21 days, so please be patient as well as diligent. Though assuming you have reached the point where you can easily observe yourself, your action, and reactions etc., we can now move on to observing core fears. It was mentioned earlier that surface fears, such as being frightened by a spider, or feeling fearful of losing one's job, are not core fears, therefore it is not these type of fears being observed. What you are looking for will in a general sense be hidden and will take a little effort to uncover, identify and raise to the conscious self, so let us now begin. When looking for a core fear, it is like looking across the landscape seeing a line of trees, wondering if these trees are a woodland. The first thing we see are the green trees, while behind them would be the dense brown woodland. Yet, until you get up close, then you do not know if a woodland exists. Fears are the same, as on the surface they give off one appearance, while behind there are deeper and denser energies. But you will not know this until you come up close to the energy that's driving them. However, let's now go back to the plane analogy. Imagine you are now observing from the co-pilot's seat and that things are going on without your immediate awareness. The co-pilot, who is now the main pilot, assures you it's okay, as the plane is flying on autopilot. Although slightly overwhelmed, you begin to observe it all. You look at every switch, knob, dial and control, not knowing what on earth it is for. Nevertheless, and as daunting as this task is, you pledge to yourself to focus on observing. Though not only are you observing the cockpit controls, as the co-pilot, your job is to grasp the departure, the flight path, and the destination that you are bound for. Just as you're about to panic, the pilot reassures you that as this flight is a long haul, there is more than enough time to observe and familiarize. To uncover and coax fears out of hiding, observing like that in the cockpit is essential. In other words, attempt to relax and enjoy observing yourself, your daily life, your actions and reactions to everything that goes on. At this point it is a good idea to grab a notepad and pen, and begin to write down all that you discover in yourself. While this might sound tedious, when we sift through this later, what you will be left with are some golden nuggets. These nuggets will ultimately link and lead you to your core fears, so it is vitally important this seemingly menial task is performed. There are 3 levels of observation that are critical in transforming core fears. That is, level 1 equals your bigger life's picture. Level 2 equals your daily life. Level 3 equals daily life's details. For ease and simplicity, we are going to work back from level 1 to level 3. We do this because your bigger life's picture is a direct result of your daily life. Your daily life is a direct result from the details in that daily life, which ultimately is contributing and influencing your entire reality. Therefore, your bigger life's picture could be likened to a Christmas tree. At the top of the tree, which is level 1, there is only room for one major decoration, while at ground level, level 3, the tree fans out, with several decorations. As you will now uncover, in daily life and reality, It could be said that fear operates in exactly the same way. Level 1, your bigger life's picture. When you awake but just prior to arising, ask yourself, what are the big fears in your life? What is it that bugs you the most? It could be anything from a dislikable part of your anatomy, to an overall lack of confidence, to global warming. Nevertheless, start to reflect and observe, what are your biggest worries, woes, inhibitions, insecurities, and drawbacks in life? In a general sense, the biggest fears are the most hidden fears, and the most hidden are the things that we'd rather not see, so allow plenty of time and patience for this part of the module. Observe, not judge, but observe where you are going in your life. Imagine you can remotely view your own life and route. Observe without criticism where you are in relation to that route. Are you on course to live the life you imagined when you were younger? If not, observe what it is that's slowing you down, knocking you off course, and preventing you reaching your destination. Additionally, pretend. Pretend that for today only, you can call upon the power of the universe to change one major thing in your life. 11. What would that one thing be? Would it be something physical like money, emotional like inner security and contentment, or mental such as an academic award? Whatever you imagine, even if they are wild and fantasy-based, as this is only ever between you and you, be 100% truthful to yourself and write them out. From the 3 paragraphs above, you will be gleaning quite a significant amount of information, and it is not unusual to write out stuff you never quite knew about yourself. Remember, you are only ever writing out what comes up, a type of parrot fashion, so please allow yourself adequate time to settle into the observation mode. Level 2, your daily life again, and meant in a general sense only. All of life's major fears will at some point show up in your everyday daily life. Everything you do, the transport you take, food you eat, clothes you wear, home you live in, is influenced by unconscious core fears. As an example, instead of eating his favorite lunchtime food, chili con carne, Harry avoided it, eating sandwiches instead, yet he may never consciously know why it was he took this action. As it happened, 3 days ago Harry's wife read an article that too much chili con carne was bad for daily consumption. Unknowing to Harry, his overall consciousness knows how much he values his body, keep fit regime, and his wife's opinion. Therefore, and irrespective of the story's truth, Harry's overall consciousness gets to work preventing him eating the bad food. As it knows, he fears being unhealthy, which feeds from another core fear of unhealthy equals death. Then he becomes guided by his subunconscious. As mentioned earlier, as the human mind processes information in exactly the same way, it matters not if the information is truthful or not. In other words, Harry's inner dynamics are functioning 100% correctly in the sense that they are pulling from previous associated experiences that somewhere along Harry's life, he has perceived unhealthy food equals death. Yet, that's not all. As if death was the end of it, then he could simply process the rationality that chili con carne is no better or worse than any other food, but at the core of Harry's core, he most likely fears death itself. So working it back up to daily life, we can see that a core fear of death and non-existence feeds a perception that certain foods can contribute and bring this death on earlier than desired. Yet it is vital to realize that the perception of unhealthy food is just that. It is a perception, and not necessarily the absolute truth. The truth is that many unhealthy eaters live as long, and sometimes longer, than unhealthy eaters. The point being that it is the fear that drives and creates the havoc in Harry's life, not the actual circumstance or situation itself. While this is a very basic example, nonetheless it is a daily driver that you may find exists in your own life. When at level 2, start to observe your own daily life, and how you operate in it. Examples might be, why did I take the tube today, instead of the bus or my car? What made me go here or there for lunch? Why did I not leave the office on time? The key observation is to observe your daily life, but more importantly the routine you have in it. Outlined below is a perfect sample of daily routine in action. According to 12 Nomadic Matt, only 21% of Americans hold a passport and the other 79% remain in their own backyard, not for the lack of money, but because of fear. In his own words, Matt says the following: Americans are just scared of the world. There are terrorists outside every hotel waiting to kidnap you. People don't like you because you are American. The world is violent. It's poor. It's dirty. It's savage. Canada and Europe are okay. But, if you go there, they will still be rude to you because you are American. No one likes us. Though you may not be the above, observe what it is in yourself that holds and maintains your daily routines. Observe what holds you into your city, neighborhood, home, work, relationships, even mundane routines such as taking the same dog walk, going to the same mall, drinking at the same coffee shop, sitting in the same seat, at exactly the same time. Observe all these things and write them down. Level 3, your daily life's details. Very rarely do we ever observe the finer details in our daily lives, and we don't do this for valid rational reasons. That is, if we stopped to observe and analyze every single action, reaction and detail, not only would it drive you crazy, in doing so, life would be passing you by. However, you are not seeking to live from this mode, merely you are looking to perfect the art of flipping in and out at will. That is, the old rule of 80/20 comes under fire. Instead of 80% of reality happening from the subunconscious, with only 20% happening from conscious awareness, we look to increase the 20, while decreasing the 80. In doing so, you will become more of a pilot in the creation of your own reality. Though not only that, you will significantly reduce an undesired with a replacement for a preferred future life. So, what do we mean by observing the details? Well, at this level you are going to observe your every action and reaction to everything that comes into and happens in your daily life. For example, Harry walked away from the counter and had almost left the shop before he realized he had been shortchanged. Without thought, he then went back, surprising himself with the snappiness in which he hurled at the shopkeeper. While it took a while to calm down, Harry later recalled that he was embarrassed to check the change in front of the keeper, but was angry when he discovered he was shortchanged. So where is Harry's hidden fear and how is it affecting the details in his daily life? Well, when Harry failed to immediately check the change, note that it was a refusal with himself, not the shopkeeper. Had he checked the change without embarrassment to himself, then the snappy words of anger could not create. The embarrassment he felt was most likely due to past and previous unprocessed situations that bore a similar relevance whereby he himself was exposed to embarrassment. Unprocessed energy is just that, unprocessed, which remains lodged in the human system until it is consciously processed. Please make a note of this sentence because it is very powerful indeed. That is, do you remember earlier that we spoke of the two brain glands? The amygdala and the hippocampus. Can you also recall that during early childhood the hippocampus is not mature enough to process long-term memory and that it was the amygdala gland that temporarily processes these emotions instead? Well, this is the root to all unprocessed emotions, and they are unprocessed because when young, the brain is not mature enough to properly and rationally process them. As the amygdala temporarily performs this job, it is also the same gland responsible for the production of fear. So what is being said that when young, the amygdala creates fears due to the inability of the hippocampus job to rationalize and store processed material. However, that's not all. Remember Harry's knee-jerk reaction was to sound off snappily? Well, this is also the result of hidden core fears, and speaking openly and frankly, to blame himself is really just a misunderstanding of how human dynamics operate. Anger can be thought of as pent-up, unprocessed energy that is compressing itself, and then bleeding through as anger. As Harry said, he was angry when he discovered being shortchanged. This is an indicator that his tolerance levels are on the low side. His inability to accept a potential mistake led him to expect 100% correctness. In that, he becomes inflexible, rigid, and full of expectations. Yet where is the hidden fear in this type of reaction? Well, if Harry were to strip back his own inner self, first off he would come up against the reactional energy called anger. Though he was angry at being shortchanged, this is only a trigger and not the root cause of his anger. Reaction is only ever a trigger, an indicator of something that's propelling and driving it. If Harry were to self-reflect and curiously question his reaction, then he most likely would come up against an underlying fear. That is, all anger can be thought of as fear expressed outwardly, insomuch that when Harry discovered he was shortchanged, he was most likely offended, and at the risk of feeling embarrassment by having to approach the shopkeeper, his fear turns to and gets expressed as anger. Of course, this is only another basic example, though the point being that behind every action and reaction, some form of fear can be found. Having said the above, the suggestion is not to become overcritical, but to observe your overall self, your actions and reactions to the details in daily life, whereby you will begin to discover and uncover your own hidden core fears. So just to recap, the goal of this section is to observe who it is flying your own plane, so to speak. There is no requirement to make judgments or be self-critical. At this stage, observation is the key. As a suggestion only, please allow yourself 1 or 2 full weeks to reflect and observe your own life's bigger picture, your daily routines, and the details in your daily life. Step 3. Identifying fear. Identifying fear is not so difficult, though identifying core fears are a little more demanding. To find a fear, in particular a core fear, all we need to do is study the data from the above observations. However, as you will require a little guidance, we will not just leave it at that. Let us now take one step further than observation alone. That is, by now you should have a good idea of how you are operating, what your actions and reactions to things are, and have a general overview of how your own dynamics are operating. Though please be patient with not only yourself, but with this module, because you have embarked upon the greatest task that you could ever take in life, and the task is mastering thyself. Nevertheless, we do not mean this in a motivational, pep talk, inspiring kind of way. What we mean is cultivating more awareness of the self, and then using that awareness to guide and bring into your life that which you prefer. You are now in your own cockpit observing the controls and on a fast-track program of learning to fly the plane. The plane being an analogy for your own body, the cockpit is your command center called mind, and the pilot is your very own consciousness. This module has been crafted in a way that flows seamlessly with consciousness. That is, although the surface mind can read at a much faster rate, overall consciousness processes differently. In other words, what the mind reads, thinks and processes, is not what your overall consciousness will process. As an example, how many times have you come across something, slept on it, and then changed your mind the next day? This is so because the processing rate of overall consciousness, that is surface, sub, and unconscious, all process data at different rates. In other words, your mind might say yes, when afterwards and once it has been digested by your subtle levels of reality, then the decision can and often does change. This information is being furnished now to familiarize you with your own inner dynamics, as when identifying, time is required to reflect and digest all levels of reality. Furthermore, and when observing, you will begin to realize that the mind is not you, but it is a very useful tool to guide you. So now let's progress and begin to identify some core fears. There are a few ways in which to uncover core fears, so let's break them down into manageable sections. Observe what you act and react to. Observe what it is you strongly desire. 1. observe what you act and react to. It is said that every action and reaction contains a core fear, and here is the reason why. Fear is the polar opposite energy to love, and as humans we are only ever doing one of two things, loving or fearing. Briefly translated, it means something is either being attracted or repelled, moving towards or away, either actioning or reacting to, but never remaining still. Think about it. Can you ever recall a time where you really became still? By still we mean, can you recall a time when your blood stopped circulating, your 4 trillion biological cells stopped moving, your heart stopped beating, your mind stopped thinking, with no thoughts, and a complete blank reality? Though it is never given any thought to, scientists will tell you that nothing can ever remain truly still. It may appear so, yet the reality is your blood is constantly circulating, your 4 trillion cells are constantly vibrating, your heart never stops beating, and your mind never ever really becomes blank. It is not possible because reality is in a constant state of flux. In layman's terms it means that energy equals action and that it is always in a state of doing. Please take some time to slow down and digest the above sentence. For when we truly grasp the dynamics of human energy, then we can use it to its fullest potential. However, before we can do this, we must first know how it operates. Therefore, and avoiding deep science, please bring to your awareness that energy is always in a state of flux, and it is either doing one thing or another. As it cannot not do, in other words. As energy cannot stand still, and that means human energy too, then it is always doing something. Like a magnet, that something only ever has two polar opposites, with variants in between. North or south, positive or negative, fear or desire, moving towards or away, left or right, up or down, night or day, light or dark, black or white. Or put another way, actions and reactions. Nevertheless, as this can easily be tried out by yourself, please do not just accept our word for it. With the risk of sounding condescending, though it is genuinely not meant that way, test this out by trying to stop your own energy moving. However, we do not suggest physical harm or any attempt to stop the heart beating. Yet, try to stop your mind from thinking, by commanding all thoughts, images, feelings, and any intuition to stop. It is not possible, right? While this might appear humorous, the results are really very important. That is, when you know that nothing can ever remain motionless, or stand still, then this realization can be used as a very powerful dynamic. When we fully understand that energy cannot stand still, then we give up using the terminology of "I'm not doing anything," or "I was neither actioning or reacting." Once given up, the mind switches into observation and identification mode. That is, the mind knows it is either actioning or reacting to something, and when asked for, it will happily furnish you with this information. Take every opportunity to write out how and what you action and causes you to react. For example, your partner may ask for you to cook a meal. Either you action it by cooking, or react to it with a rejection. Though what does this have to do with core fears? Well, as has already been said, behind every action and reaction are some form of fears. Here's a quick example. Jim was asked to perform a corporate presentation, something he is very apt at. Nevertheless, on this occasion, he reacted with hesitation. When Jim engaged with himself, asking his conscious mind to bring to his awareness why it was he was adopting hesitation, then days later the following began to surface. Although Jim liked compiling presentations, he found that presenting them raised some form of fear. At first glance he assumed this to be everyday anxiety, yet when he followed the anxiety back, he discovered that he was jittery about being rejected. Jim felt that although the contents of his presentation were factual and even profitable, for what he himself deemed an irrational reaction, he feared he may be rejected. However, the core is not rejection, as rejection is also a byproduct of an associated real-life experience that will be set much further back. Though in Jim's case, and to speed up the story, when Jim traced his associated event back, which we will cover later, he found an unprocessed real-life experience that he had unknowingly held on to, which in turn was sub-unconsciously influencing and affecting today's reality. What started off back in Jim's early years, though this is not restricted to childhood alone. Yet, Jim found the original core real-life event that created and then embedded it as a core fear. The fear is created simply because the brain was not mature enough to rationally process the incoming information at the time of happening. This unprocessed energy then goes on to influence and affect the next similar event. As time goes by, the reality of Jim's life is such that the original event becomes so overlaid with thousands of similar linked experiences, that the core cannot be consciously recalled. But the core is 100% intact and responsible for today's reaction of fear. While this is only an example of a somewhat mild fear, it serves to highlight that every action and reaction does indeed have energy of fear behind it. Though it can appear trivial and mundane, once these core fears are identified, unearthed and dissolved, then transformational magic happens. That is, Jim would have no issues whatsoever in presenting. But not only that. Anything that triggered Jim's energy of rejection would no longer drive him to anxiously fear. 2. Observe what it is you strongly desire. Can you recall that earlier we introduced the idea that both fear and desire are from the same energy family? Well, here is a way to try out that suggestion. Think of something that you strongly desire. Not just desire, or really like, but something that you strongly desire. Now think about that desire and the strength behind it. As an example, people often say they want to be rich and become wealthy, and while you may have heard some of this before, as they're additions to old methods of assuming, please stick with it. To the untrained mind, a strong desire is just that, it's a strong desire. Yet to the cognitive psychologist, they will tell you that desire is actually a fear turned inside out. However, allow us to add an additional perspective as to what desire really is. Go back and imagine that strong desire. For ease and speed, let's pick a real burning desire. Now please grab your notebook and write down the answer to the following question. What is it that you desire more than anything else in the world right now? ... Whether your desire is a physical thing, something emotional or mental matters not. What matters most is the strength behind the desire, so a strong desire is preferred. Now ask your conscious mind to go off and find what it is that's driving you towards this desire. It can take seconds, days or weeks for the answers to surface, yet when asked with full-on conscious intent is covered later, the answers will surface. Though to help you out a little, please allow us to guide you. Do you recall that for most, they think desire is just that desire, and that psychologists say that desire is fear turned inside out? Well, what if they were both right? To fully understand and grasp the dynamics of this energy, we must start at the beginning. Desire is indeed the polar opposite energy of fear, just like night is the polar opposite of day. So, and in a general sense, either something is being feared, or desired. Anything in between are just variations of the same energy shifting from left to right, or better said, one pole to the other. Imagine the scales that start off balanced. We place some fear on the left, and some desire on the right, eventually they will balance out, right? Human energy works in a similar fashion, in so much that when a fear is created, to cancel, or balance it out, then its polar opposite is required. Nevertheless, and remember the fear still exists, and that desire has been placed on the scales to balance and cancel fear out. Put another way. Think of the dynamics during a tug-of-war. The rope gets pulled one way, and to counteract and balance it must be pulled the opposite way. This is where the push and pull stems from, and it is no different when applied to the dynamics of being human. To identify fears, we start with a desire. The stronger the desire, the more intense the hidden fear. Now going back to your own strong desire that you wrote down above. Assuming you have posed the curious questioning to your conscious mind, then your overall consciousness has little choice but to go off and find it. To speed up the process, let's go back to the poor and rich analogy. When asked what it is they desire most in life, the top answer is money. Most state they want to be rich, and that being wealthy will end all their troubles. Yet, if we were to directly confront them that this strong desire is in fact a core fear, the conscious mind would reject it. This is so because the sub-unconscious will do all it can to maintain distance from the pain that is held in the core fear. The human system does this simply because this is the dynamics of being human, and as mentioned earlier, because fear is destructive and desire productive, no human can grow and evolve from a premise of fear. Therefore, and when young, overall consciousness takes the most productive route to grow and develop, hence it overlays core fears with future desires. That is, he wants to be wealthy because he dislikes being poor. Why yet it goes further. The stronger the desire, the more likely its polar opposite of fear exists, which is also holding on to a painful real-life experience that has embedded itself with unprocessed emotional pain. In other words, there is one or more associated events that are holding on to unprocessed emotions, and until raised to the conscious mind, these painful experiences will continue to operate and influence from the subunconscious. This is what's called a core fear, and to quantify their identity, all we need do is to look at how some individuals have freed themselves. For example, and sticking with the wealth analogy, for the individuals who make it from poverty to wealth, and then choose to process their unprocessed material, almost always experience an emotional release. Examples of this can be seen on TV programs such as Secret Millionaire, whereby the now wealthy person visits their roots in an attempt to help less fortunate individuals. When they revisit, they reconnect. When they reconnect, they trigger their own childhood memories, and for most, they are now in a position to rationally process their core fears. In the doing, there is always a powerful emotional painful release of past dislikable experiences that then go on to make compelling TV. However, did you notice we said almost always experience an emotional release? That is, for a small minority who avoid going near their own inner core fears continue on with their fears intact. These are the individuals in life that no matter what amount of wealth they accumulate, insecurity always drives them. Here is a real-life example. Colin is now in his 50s, and most would say that his net worth, currently standing at $8 million would give him more than a comfortable life. However, the reality is not so rosy. Colin has, by his own admission, accumulated his wealth by slaving as a landlord. He lives in less than 30 square meters, maintains and repairs his student properties all by himself. He is married with one child, drives an old second-hand car, and rarely spends cash on himself. Again, and in his own admission, he says he is a slave to his own reality and that he cannot change. His motivations are his only child, whom he states that when he passes, his cash will ensure his daughter will not have to work the way he has. Question: what do you think makes the difference between a truly happy poor person and a grossly unhappy wealthy person? Answer: core fear. One way to identify core fears is to take your strong desires, and look at their polar opposite to see if the polar opposite stirs something uncomfortable in you. If it does, then it is quite likely the desire is an overlaid fear that is being driven with an unpleasant associated experience that has stored painful emotions. If it does not, then this is not a true indicator that your strong desire is in fact a desire, but it is most likely being protected by your own negative ego. During our studies, we have found that all strong desires, not desires, but strong desires, hold some form of core fears, and that until identified, unearthed and dissolved, they will continue to influence and propel in a destructive direction. Section 6. Shifting from poverty to wealth. You might now be wondering, or are confused, as to why and how some people seem to evolve from poverty into wealth, or better stated, move themselves from a life of fear into a life of desire. How do they achieve this? Well, only through intense social studies. It is our opinion that the universe is not random, not cruel, and not out to deal you a bad life. Though we now ask that you prepare yourself, for this is where the module is going to get a little deep. However, before we get down to it, please do your utmost to stick with it, because in order to uproot and dissolve core fears, then intensity is required. May we take this moment to outline that as constructors of this module, and to quantify the contents within. Over long periods of time, 10 years plus, we have intentionally subjected ourselves to massive amounts of irrational, rational, and endless amounts of what has been considered unrealistic fears. While we appreciate that all human states such as fear, desire, love, hate, well-being, peace and happiness are all subjective states of being human, we assure you that the fears we have purposely subjected ourselves to are the most feared of all. It is said that 99.9% of all humans are born into fear, simply because humanity as a whole have collectively bought into the framework of fear. Fear, being the polar opposite of desire, is a driving force in our everyday lives. Nevertheless, we are not looking to remove the good, protective, life-sustaining fears. It is the core fears that contain you from becoming who it is you truly desire to be. However, for some bizarre reason it can sound really off-putting to say that deal with core fears and happiness will ensue. In fact, during the early years of our own studies, fear was such a large part of our reality, that we could easily have assumed this life and reality to be a reality of fear, and any concept of living from a life of desire and happiness was just that, a concept. During our studies, and in particular when we first broke through a fear, the outcome was a degree of contentment. While this might sound a little flimsy, we are slowly but surely coming to the understanding that fear is one of the greatest illusionary constructs of reality that binds an individual to a particular position and place for their entire life. What we have discovered and would like to share is that regardless of one's position in their world, fear appears to have a strong connection. Furthermore, and this may come as an absolute shock, yet we are discovering that many super-rich and noble aristocracy types are at risk of inheriting more core fears than most. Not poor people that make it rich, but wealthy who were born wealthy. During our time, we stumbled across a dynamic that works with accuracy. That is, you can only ever have what it is you want when you no longer want it. This dynamic is so powerful, please allow it a line of its own. You can only ever have what you want when you no longer want it. Though covered in its own module, Getting What You Want Now. Transforming Inner Resistance, for convenience we have included a section below. Section 7, You Can Only Ever Have What You Want, When You No Longer Want It. There is a transformational key that naturally diminishes and keeps resistance in its rightful place. It is what we refer to as the jewel in the crown, and it is why it was saved to now. That is, you can only ever have what you want, when you no longer want it. While the above might sound like a confusing tongue twister, it is not meant to. You can only ever have what you want, when you no longer want it refers to a human dynamic that when applied to daily life and reality, has an extremely powerful transformational effect. Here's why. When something is wanted, it is normally thought of as a desire. When strongly desired, then in a general sense, there is also a fear that the very thing being desired will not come to fruition. This can be seen in action with TV talent finals when the winning title must go to one of two. As each semi-finalist patiently waits for the winner to be announced, both contestants must also ponder the prospect and reality of second place. While second place is okay, it is not their desired outcome. Therefore, and as a general rule only, as much as they both desire the number one slot, they equally fear the undesired outcome. That is, second place. If there is more fear than desire, then resistance adopts the side of fear and the very thing that was desired, gets pushed further away. that is unless resistance can be physically overcome, which does not normally happen, simply because there is no conscious awareness of it. Though in reality, and albeit sub-unconsciously, one contestant will be internalizing more fear than the other. Nevertheless, at the same point in time a desire is desired. The human dynamic of desire also co-creates its polar opposite of an undesired outcome. That is, the feared outcome of losing to second place is also created. This happens because behind and fueling the strong desire is normally a core driver, which is also normally a fear. If the desired outcome is a strong desire, then this is a signal that there is an overlaid core fear, which is serving to motivate them in the opposite direction. That is, desires overlay core fears to keep them from being consciously feared, yet are embedded and in full existence. As these polarities are the same, and fear is propelled by fear, the outcome is more of the same. That is, fear is feeding and fueling fear. So the reality is that the very thing being strongly desired creates so much resistance, that the possibility of it coming into fruition is diminished. However, there is an alternative, and that is, when there is no core fear fueling and propelling the strong desire, then in effect, the very want becomes a take it, or leave it. In other words, because there is no core driver attaching to the outcome, then there is no attachment to outcome. Instead of it being a want, or desire, it reduces to a preference, and because the dynamic of preferences do not hold resistance, there is nothing to stop preferences coming into reality. So, when in a genuine position of being able to either take it, or leave it, then all resistance and all conductivity balances out. When in that state of balance, that is take it, or leave it, then one can choose what it is they experience. As an example, while there are a proportion of rising pop stars that struggle for fame and fortune, there are others that appear to just breeze into stardom without much competition. Likewise, there are entrepreneurs that spend their entire careers struggling, while others appear to make it quickly and easily. Why is this? Well, upon closer analysis, rising artists like Enrique Iglesias stated that regardless of his desire for success, he truly accepted and lived as though he might never make it. Richard Branson also talks of being in a position being able to take it, or leave it, and not being motivated by money or materialism. The late Steve Jobs was described as an anti-materialistic hippie, yet he ended up one of the world's wealthiest men. What is being outlined is that all three examples were not attached to their outcomes, and they were all in a position to take it, or leave it, so to speak. However, there are those that may say this is simply not true, as all three of the above have demonstrated incredible tenacity towards attaining success, and that is true. However, at their core, that is, at the inner place of subjective talk, they did not fear not becoming. That is, they did not fear living a life of not making it, so to speak, and they were at peace with who they already were. While there may not be an immediate acceptance of the above, please have a look around your own life and reality. For a moment, ponder and try to think of strongly desired situations, circumstances and outcomes. Think of things that you once wanted, though, for whatever reason, they just did not happen. Yet, with the passage of time, maybe even years, when you let go, give up, even forgot the want altogether, suddenly, they, or whatever the want was, actually came to you. It could be a childhood sweetheart, toys, cars, a home, a job, work, career, material things, emotional, physical or otherwise. Have you ever noticed that there is indeed some truth in that? You can only ever have what you want, when you no longer want it. Section 8, Unlocking and Dissolving Core Fears. We have now reached the doing in the transformational process. In this section we will unlock and dissolve core fears, which will then allow you the freedom to create what it is you really desire from your life. Having said that, when we say desire, we really mean prefer. That is, as desires are driven by fears and preferences have no attachment, then process and dissolve core fear, and desire goes with it. Once the transformational process is complete, you will experience a real-life letting go of all desires. Though please do not confuse a desireless life to be anything less than inspiring and exciting. As what is meant from desireless means that when all core fears are unlocked and processed, then the human system automatically lets go of core desires. Once the drive of desire is gone, what you will be left with are preferences. Preferences are more than preferred because operating from a true state of preference rather than desire, means there is no restriction of incoming energy. The very word preference means you can take it or leave it, and when this dynamic is truly grasped, then you will arrive at the same understanding happy, content, healthy, abundant, peaceful individuals arrive at. That is, they do not dictate where their energy goes. Desire instructs energy to go this way or that way, but preferences leave the routes open. In other words, imagine a poor man who desires to be wealthy, and he desires life to be a certain direction. This man has given his life and reality only one route, and while some might say that focus is everything. If this were the case for the energy of desire, then 85% of the world would be wealthy instead of 85% just desiring it. If desire worked, then desires would easily manifest, but they do not. Our suggestion is that desires do not easily manifest because they are fueled and driven by hidden core fears. Yet, when in a state of preference, then true magical transformation can happen. That is, go back to the poor man and now imagine he has processed and dissolved all core fears. He has genuinely let go of every single desire and is truly in a state of preference, which translates directly into he can take it, or leave it. Now he may still prefer to be wealthy, but he is no longer driven and it is not an emotionally loaded must-have in his life. When he can live peacefully in one state or another, that is, he can have what he wants when he no longer wants it. Then he moves to a state of preference. When in a state of preference, he becomes open and flexible to varying options. He can now become wealthy in more ways than one. As his overall consciousness knows that he is not instructing his energy to go only the way of fear/desire, his overall consciousness can bring to him that which he prefers. In other words, his wealth can come from more avenues than one. But more importantly, he is not restricting his own flow of energy. While there is an appreciation that this is a difficult concept to grasp, please make a note that this is a fact, and not just a theory. Preference gives your reality a multitude of options, whereas desire is a single point of focus. If that single point of focus is founded upon core fears, then your reality will struggle to manifest it. Though the whole point of this section is to outline something deeper. That is, when in a state of desire, what is really being said that I want this, and because the I is the construct of the ego, which also stems from fear, then operating from this system is not a universal truth. It may be your truth, but it is not a truth of the universe, and to manifest what it is you want, then desire must first be transformed into a preference. This happens when concept of self is renounced, or better stated, when we let go of it is me that is creating this life and reality, in favor of the allowing whatever it is that creates reality, create through you. While we recognize that the flow of this module may stretch human boundaries, those any abundantly, healthy, happy, and peaceful individual will declare, they have reached their level in life only by letting go of old paradigms and allowing the source of energy to freely move through and create them. However, we do not profess to personally know this source, which has terminology ranging from intelligent by design, energy, spirit, through to God. What we do know is that perhaps unintentionally the drivers and dynamics of being human have to date been man's single and biggest human driver that has gone on to create the perception of separation, the illusionary self, and a belief structure that life and reality is real, in so much that this is all there is. Now we move on to another of life's paradoxes. In order to fully renounce fear, one must pass through the concepts called illusions, that hold and bind every single fiber of fear together, In layman's terms it means turning and facing every fear that ever comes your way. Yet, we are not talking about just feeling the fear and doing it anyway, or mastering the mind to overcome and face your fears. What we are talking about is getting to the core root and then picking apart and unlinking that root, similar to the way it was formed. To gain this result, and truly attain a level of piloting your own plane, so to speak, our studies have shown that dissolving associated experiences is an absolutely essential aspect of the process. Step 1. Being friends with fear, technique. We begin this process by befriending fear. As bizarre and alien as this may first sound, the reality is that befriending fear actually reduces fear. It does not eliminate it, though it does take the sting out of its tail, so to speak. This is so because fear's role is to fear, and when turned and faced with a friendly embrace, the dynamic called fear naturally disempowers itself. As an example, it is said the number one fear is death. Whether that be the death of a friend, loved one, or self, death is one of the most pushed aside subjects in the world. However, as taboo and unnatural as this might sound, we are going to take death, and actually befriend it. Though please allow it to be outlined that although we are going to use the fear of death, the befriending technique works for every known fear to man. Therefore, whether you fear spiders, public speaking, feel insecure, low self-esteem, experience panic attacks, anxiety, depression, etc., etc., the technique is the same. So let us begin with facing the fear of one's own death. If you cannot feel fear from your own death, then pick someone whom you feel a strong attachment to. Now begin with the thoughts and images of what the outcome of that scenario would be like. If like most, you will feel fear not from the actual death, but the possible pain in the process. Possible is highlighted simply because it is the mind that associates pain to death, but it does not mean you will face pain during your own passing. Secondly, the mind thinks of people, loved ones, relatives and friends they would have to leave behind. Then the mind thinks of all the things it has not achieved, and will potentially miss out on. Again, potentially is highlighted simply because there is no known fact whether you would miss out, or not. Nevertheless, this is what the average mind would ponder and mull over. Then the mind thinks for others' well-being, worrying and wondering if those left behind will be okay, and then the mind wonders where, if anywhere, you will be going. Because the mind does not know, the mind assumes life to be a one-shot deal, or that something better awaits them on the other side. Yet, others may believe in something more simple, like non-existence and that afterlife, that's that. However, we cannot tell you what does or does not await your fate upon death. Yet what can be achieved is the dissolving of any and all fears beforehand. Nevertheless, it does not mean that you are inching closer to death, it simply means you are free from the fear of death. So how does one achieve this? Well, the dynamic is quite simple. The effect is magnanimous. Now let's go back a few paragraphs and think about how you felt when reading the death word. In a general sense, death equals fear, and although there is fear in the possible process of dying, fear in leaving loved ones, fear in not achieving or being you anymore, the biggest fear is the fear of the unknown. Yet did you see how many times fear came up, and how much death is engulfed in fear? Yes, there were at least 5 fears from one 5-letter word. That is, man's biggest fear is that life and reality appear to have no beginning or end, and so it is the mind cannot work out where it is you go afterwards. Think about it, and ponder a time when you did not exist. Think about who it was you were before you came to this reality. While we are talking metaphorically and speeding this module up, please take some time to digest the above. As for most, there is no memory of a beginning, no knowledge of an end, and there is only ever the now. However, we are not stepping into Eckhart Tolle's territory of living in the now, yet we would like to bring to the mind what catches us all out. That is, conscious awareness, or better stated, a lack of it. Now, for a moment, let's go back to the plane analogy. Remember, you are the observing co-pilot, but you still have no awareness of how to take off and land. In other words, you are flying along at the trust of the pilot, just like you are doing life in the trust of, well, what is it that you trust? We will come back to this point in a little while. Though can you remember that as a passenger you would have had no knowledge of the cockpit whatsoever, but now is a very different scenario. Albeit you do not know how to operate them. The controls are now clearly in view. Now ponder the aspect, do you really think and believe life and reality has no controls? Do you really think and believe that there is no creator, or creators, and that this is all there is? If and when the self shifts from the old paradigms of being an aimless passenger in life, to the new concept of co-piloting towards a purpose, then paradoxically reality shifts with it. When the shift happens from hope to trust, and there is a huge difference, then a remarkable transformation happens. That is, when one hopes, what they are really saying to themselves is that I do not know, perhaps I even disbelieve, but I hope. Yet, when that same person has an innate connection, then hope is replaced with trust, and where there is trust, there is an innate connection. This is called a positive perpetuating cycle, one that is productive and preferred. However, people that hope cannot trust, like those that trust do not live in hope. These can be likened to Apple, Mac and Windows, which as you already know are two very different systems. So how does one move their life and reality from fear, through to hope, and then on to trust? Well, fear is felt mostly from the perceived separation, the assumption that the individual is individual, and that everything on the outside is indeed outside themselves and separate. While there has already been a great deal of work on this subject already, we are not about to try and recreate the wheel, so to speak. Though if one is truly dedicated to the dissolution of core fears, then the illusion of separation must go with it. It is our opinion that this is easily achieved with a few simple steps. Imagine you are in a cinema watching a movie. Suddenly you feel a shift and you are now the actor in that movie. After a while, there is another sudden shift and you are now the projector of the movie. You look out and amazingly you see yourself in both the movie, and as the viewer in the cinema. However, you are not too surprised because all three are intrinsically connected. You are the watcher, the actor, and the projector of the movie. It is the ultimate 3D game called real life, with a twist that it's 100% interactive. That is, whatever you project, interacts and acts out on the screen. Whatever is on the screen, interacts with and influences the watcher. The watcher perceives and interacts back with the projector, and so the perpetual interaction cycle continues. It's a wild and fictional concept, yet one that seriously diffuses fear. How can this diffuse fear? Because the pilot of the plane, or the projector of the movie is none other than your very own conscious awareness, that until now, has played out a game of illusionary separation. Why have you done this? To experience yourself as a self, and to have the thrill of a life and reality. The rules being that until you raise your level of awareness, or in other words, until you fully gain control of our own dynamics, then limited consciousness will always buy into the belief that it is separated from the self. While separated from self, consciousness has no awareness of a beginning nor end, and it cannot have this because it would blow the whole interactive game called life. Though to get back to the whole, and break the illusion of a separated self, then fear, which was a construct to create separation, simply has to be dissolved. Fear can be dissolved because it is not real in the first place. Did you hear that? There, we said it, fear is not and never could be real in the first place. Here's a quick example. Imagine a tiny dog, snapping, and barking at your feet. This tiny dog barks away thinking it can take you down. Imagine how strong this tiny dog perceives itself to be. It must feel fearless, right? Now imagine you do a role reversal. You swap bodies, and now you are that tiny dog looking up towards the big you. What does the tiny dog feel? Yes, you guessed it, fear. It's barking and snapping because it fears you. Isn't it amazing that both you and the tiny dog feel the same fear? So when you come up against fear, swap places and become the actual fear. Yes, that's right. Imagine knocking on an unknown door, fearing what's on the other side. Then swap places and become the other side, imagining opening the door to yourself. Who are you afraid of? Yes, it's yourself. Fear is not outside, it is only and ever on the inside, yet when we swap places, we find that fear is unwilling to play the game. Why? Because it didn't exist in the first place. Fear really is a construct of the mind, though there is an understanding that it is real in reality. It is real because once consciousness projects it into 3D reality, giving it all the attributes of real life and reality, then it becomes as real as it ever could be. Nevertheless, and please, take some time out to consider that whatever fear comes forth into reality, has its roots firmly planted in the subunconscious. That is, if a personal tragedy, or an unknown fear just suddenly appears, then somewhere in one's overall consciousness, a core associated fear exists. Though what are we suggesting here? We are asking you to consider viewing life from a different angle. That is, what your overall consciousness projects, ultimately reflects back in the giant 3D game called life and reality. In other words, as overall consciousness is the ultimate creator, and what you see, hear, feel, taste, touch and smell, are all perceived whether you are conscious, or unconscious. The key to change, is to make it your business to become conscious of that which you were previously unconscious of. Think of it as the plane. Rarely does the passenger have any awareness of the cockpit, controls, flight path, or pilot. However, do you remember that you are now the co-pilot, familiarizing yourself with all the controls? And that the other passengers are oblivious to your actions? Well, the same could be said for your overall consciousness. Respectfully speaking, for the moment, as you take control of your own plane, the other people in your life and reality matter not. Think of others as paid passengers, and that while you master the controls they will be unconsciously enjoying the flight. Though, as it really is quite quick and simple, let's get back to befriending fear. When you are faced with the next fear, whether big or small, turn and face it. To help with this process, think of the fear as a movie that is being presented to you, and that the fear is an act. Instead of sidestepping, avoiding, or ignoring, face up to the fear with trust. Trust that fear is not physical, and while it feels real, and it is supposed to feel real because that is fear's job. Nevertheless, when the fear comes forward, reach into it, give it a welcome hug, and embrace it. Does that sound crazy? Please allow a real-life example. Although Gordon was a semi-successful artist, he was riddled with anxiety and panic attacks, and the thought of flying tipped him over the edge every time. Regardless of his post, and at the expense of inconvenient traveling, at no time would Gordon board a plane. Nevertheless, and to reach into his root core, he now has two options. To board a plane in real life, to mentally and emotionally board a plane the dynamic way while consciously searching for the root core. While a great deal of people will choose to go through number one, it is our suggestion that feeling the fear and doing it anyway is only half the battle. Yes, you can feel the fear, and yes, it is most likely you can do it anyway, but the root still resides, right? And the next time will be exactly the same as the first, in the hope that with continual exposure, desensitization will take place. Again, and in our own experience, continual exposure does not eliminate core fears. So what does? Number 2, to mentally and emotionally board a plane the dynamic way while consciously searching for the root core. In everyday wakefulness, in a fully conscious state. Not in regression, hypnosis, or under psychotherapy, but in ordinary everyday wakefulness, the following approach was taken. Gordon was asked to sit in a relaxed position, not meditating, just to be relaxed. He stated that he felt good, was in a relaxed frame of mind, and was ready to progress. He was then asked to consciously imagine going to the airport, and step by step in his own mind, he was asked to picture the scenario of boarding the plane. Suddenly he began to experience stress. However, please bear in mind that Gordon has not gone anywhere, and that he is sitting comfortably. Nevertheless, in mentally picturing the plane scenario, automatically sends his energy to the next stage, which is to collect how he feels emotionally. That is, when his incoming energy is used to imagine boarding a plane. The first stage for all human energy is thinking. His thoughts deter the pictures, and his emotions deter the way he feels about these imagined pictures. For Gordon, the point of boarding the plane was the point he experienced distress. Now then, this is the point where he is asked to stop. Can you quickly rewind and recall that prior to this exercise Gordon was in good shape, experiencing no distress whatsoever? Yet after a few imagined thoughts, he was now experiencing real-life distress. Even though he is safe and comfortable, Gordon's own inner dynamics are sub-unconsciously, yet better termed, automatically reacting. As they are reacting adversely then to catch it before the fear takes over, Gordon is consciously asked a few searching questions. At the point he feels distress, is where Gordon is asked to connect with himself, asking his own inner self what is making him afraid of boarding the plane. For Gordon, the knee-jerk response was "I'm afraid." This is not the core. Asked afraid of what? He replied, "I don't know, I'm afraid of boarding the plane." Why are you afraid of boarding the plane? Gordon replied, "I don't know, I might die." While death is a broad sense, and most likely not the core, can you begin to see that for Gordon, each question extracts a little more out from himself? If in the moment of distress, he does not consciously question, then the fear would overtake and become his real-life experience. Though he may be experiencing distress, it is the initial distress that will lead him back to the core. However, remember the distress is man-made. In other words, by raising the plane scenario to Gordon's conscious mind, is a trigger only to raise the fear. Yet also remember that the fear is not real because he is not boarding a plane, as in reality he is sitting quite comfortable. When fear can be raised with a few simple images, it is a strong indicator that this is a trigger and not the root core. To find and get to the root, piercing through fear is required. Fear can be thought of as a membrane, or better termed, a piece of cling film stretched over a cup of water. To get to the water, piercing the cling film is required, just the same as to get to the root, piercing fear is required. Step 2. Piercing fear. How is fear pierced? Well, let's stick with Gordon and his plane scenario. While Gordon is sitting comfortably, but also experiencing fear, he is asked to mentally board the plane. Stepping onto the plane is his utmost fear, and one in which he experienced full-on panic and anxiety. Albeit he is in a comfortable armchair, as the full-on fear rips through him, Gordon's mind is convinced he's boarding a plane. Gordon now has two options, and these are exactly the same options he has in real life. Mentally he backs off from the fear, and removes his imagination from the plane. He allows, welcomes and embraces his fear to be as it is. If he backs off the picturing and changes his images, the fear will dissipate, but it will not dissolve, and next time it will resurface for experiencing. However, if Gordon mentally, emotionally and physically allows all the fear to exist, then a very transformative dynamic process gets underway. Better still, if Gordon can muster the strength to encourage and embrace his fear, then the transformational process speeds up. Sparing you from as much science as possible, and briefing it down into layman's terms. Please allow an explanation. Fear, like all human energy, comes down to an electromagnetic vibration. This vibration is recordable as an electrical pulse known as a hertz. The exact frequency of fear is yet to be unanimously decided. Nevertheless, Experiments performed by British researchers have shown 13 infrasound, which are sound waves below human hearing of 20 Hz, are responsible for humans perceiving fear, anxiety, panic, and pressure in the chest, etc., etc. On the other hand, the frequency of love is thought to be around 14,528 Hz. Though ambiguity surrounds the exact numbers, the commonality is that to experience the feeling of fear, then one must resonate in that specific frequency. Yet what creates the frequency in the first place? Associated experiences create brain neurons to form this way or that way. After the experience has been perceived as either good, or not good, a physical neuron is created that emits a specific frequency to that particular event. This in turn creates a biochemical process, which then goes on to instruct physical actions and reactions, which then go on to create your entire life and reality, and hey presto, you act and react according to whatever it was you originally perceived. If the experience was perceived as good, then it falls into the positive vibration of love/desire, though if perceived as bad, then it gets assigned and vibrates to the negative vibration of fear. See, simple isn't it? However, there's more. Although the process is simple, what complicates life and reality for most everyone is that the originally associated experience gets overlaid thousands upon thousands of times, whereby the original event can no longer be consciously remembered. Nevertheless, just because it can no longer be consciously recalled, does not mean it is non-existent. In fact, the original associated experience is hidden deeply away from the conscious self, normally residing in the subunconscious. Those we will discover further on. The really good news is that because life and reality is an interactive process of human consciousness, when the conscious mind asks the subunconscious for hidden, screened-off material, then it has no option but to respond. Though for the time being, let's get back to Gordon and piercing his full-on fear. When fear is faced full-on, it has to be consciously faced. That is, there is little benefit to feel the fear when the mind is resisting and rejecting. As resistance is a natural human dynamic which is covered in its own module, getting what you want now, transforming in a resistance, and resistance does have a rightful place in life. Nevertheless, on this occasion, resistance must be pierced. Think of it this way. Gordon's mind will do all it can to avoid the feelings, emotions, and any physical effects from fear. This is naturally what the mind does, and has done from day one, yet as we have already demonstrated earlier, the mind is not always right. If the mind's way was correct, then avoiding fear would eliminate it, though the reality is quite the opposite. Resisting fear avoids fear. Avoiding fear merely puts it on the back burner, but it does not deal with it, and the driver is alive and functioning to its fullest. Though, likened to a bodybuilder who first must resist the weight, then feels some pain until their muscle stretches, piercing fear is not too dissimilar. Yet, as any bodybuilder will advocate, resistance and perceived pain is always short-lived. When Gordon faced his fear, he consciously engages in the process, making sure he does not withdraw. Yes, there will be fear, and yes, it will go on to trigger a tsunami of biochemical and physical responses, but remember, he is in the comfort of his own imagined environment. Nevertheless, and it may take a few attempts, but as Gordon feels the full-on fear, something remarkable is also happening. Provided the attention is held on the fear, then unbeknown to him, fear will begin to subside. It has no other choice because fear requires the energy of resistance and avoidance to fuel itself. As Gordon embraces, focuses and welcomes his fear, which he did, then fear will rage and rant for a while, and then dissipate. Which it did. Fear cannot exist without the fuel to drive it, yet this is not the end. Though please do not get too ahead of the situation, as what we are discussing here is piercing fear, and we have not yet arrived at the point to dissolve it. Consciously feeling the fear full on, is one step further to the transformative process, but it is by no means the complete answer. Piercing fear can be likened to the same energy as a base jumper will go through. As they prepare to jump, fear permeates them, yet they soak it up, even feeding from the feeling. In other words, they have become used to feeling and then going beyond fear. That is, anyone and everyone who experiences fear, does so through a set cycle. Eventually, and appreciation is used with the term eventually. Though, eventually fear and the effects from fear will wash over and fizzle out. Again, and attempting to maintain simplicity, as consciousness is always in a state of flux, all fear, no matter how big or prolonged, has a set cycle. In other words, the mechanics of fight or flight kick in, then the process of fear gets underway, but as overall consciousness is the decision maker, it knows when and when not the fear is real. If when, like Gordon, you push yourself into an imagined fear, then your overall consciousness will come to the realization that although the mental, emotional and physical processes are raging with fear, there is no real fear present. Though what would happen if Gordon were to embark upon a real flight? Well, we are getting slightly ahead, and will come to this point in a short while. Though it may surprise you to know that the process, experience and outcome is exactly the same. That is, even if Gordon were to physically board a real plane, then his fear would eventually subside. It would do this because his overall consciousness is constantly in a state of flux, and it would decipher a real from a perceived threat. Though you may think Gordon's fear of death was real, his overall consciousness knows the threat was imagined, so when he does board the plane, death does not happen. However, there is more. As what do you think it would be that would stop Gordon from instantly dying when boarding the plane? And how would he know a real from an imagined fear? Well, the really good news is that all fears are imagined, and here is why. Gordon's overall consciousness knows that he does not fear the actual boarding of the plane, but what he is feeling is a byproduct of another fear. In layman's terms, this translates into what Gordon fears is the fear of the fear, and not the actual physical occurrence itself. Please allow us to repeat that. Gordon fears the fear from the fear, and not the actual fear itself. In other words, if he were to really board the plane, he may well indeed feel fear. Yet the reality is that he cannot even remember the original core fear. Nevertheless, the fear he is feeling is not the boarding of the plane, but it is the fear of the fear in boarding the plane. In other words, he has become scared, and is frightened of his own feelings of fear. While it might sound complicated, it really is just 2 layers of fear, or better stated, fear feeding itself from fear. A little like positive people attract positive people, fear goes on to create more fear. The main difference with the above fear is that it has become so overlaid, the original core experience has long been hidden from sight. It is our suggestion that Gordon's fears project into his life and reality because these are unprocessed core fears that have thousands upon thousands of overlays which are bleeding through into his reality. Though what we are really suggesting is that fears projecting into real-life reality are serious presentations that require attention. In other words, and when worked backwards, undo the real-life presented fear, work it back to its core. Raise it to the conscious self for processing, and coincidentally reality reflects these magnificent changes. Though allow it to be stated, that if Gordon were to keep piercing fear, then he might become apt at going beyond. Yet as the root is still present, if he were to continue boarding planes, then fear would continue to keep rising. The point being that piercing fear is a tool to add to one's toolbox, and while it is a step further, it is also not the answer to fear. Therefore take a fear and imagine it. Feel the fear and allow it to go through you. No matter how big, get used to welcoming and embracing the fear and begin to pierce the physical, emotional, and mental effects. In other words, become the observer, and just watch as your fear rages around itself. Eventually, and assurance is given that eventually fear will begin to subside. When it stops, continue to think thoughts of the imagined fear and try to bring back the fear. It may take 1, 10 or more times, But if you stick at it, focusing your attention on the actual fear, then eventually, like the base jumper experiences, your conscious awareness will go beyond. What is beyond fear? Serenity and calmness. Yes, the core associated fearful experience will still exist, but when the initial fear is pierced, then a calmness will ensue. If, like Gordon, there is a fear of death, then feeling that fear is part of the solution. However, if, like most, imagining their own death, or the death of others is totally off the menu. Nevertheless, please prepare yourself for the following. To eliminate the fear of death, one fully imagines and embraces the situation. This is not crazy talk, or unfounded words of wisdom. They do indeed work. As there is an aversion to picturing and emotionally connecting to one's own death, then this maintains a natural level of resistance. Resistance creates the distance which maintains the separation from consciously processing, which adds to and keeps fear alive. If death is brought forward into the conscious mind, welcomed without resistance, embraced emotionally, then a change in electromagnetic structure gets underway. Yes, there will be fear, and lots of it, yet like stated above, allow it to rip though and wash over. Eventually it will subside. When it does, the mind can process death in a way which it then comes to terms with death. Though the biggest release is the attachment to life. Later we will uncover how to release all attachments. Step 3, Unearthing, and Unlocking Core Fears. Now we must begin the task of unearthing, unlocking and dissolving core fears, so for the time being let's stick with Gordon. Remember, it was said that boarding the plane was not Gordon's core fear, and that we got back as far as him fearing death? Well, as the perception of self is a separated self, then fearing death is a somewhat natural dynamic. However, just because Gordon said he fears death, and he most likely does, when he lives from a premise of fear, then fears begin to dictate and consume his reality. In other words, the task here on is delicate and requires a large degree of patience. As like most, Gordon has millions upon billions of real-life experiences, all being analyzed with 100 or so billion brain neurons. In short, that's trillions upon trillions of varying permutations for the mind to shape and form its actions and reactions in reality. Nevertheless, it is not necessary to identify and process all 100 billion neurons, and it's not even necessary to weed out the fearful ones. All we need do is follow Gordon's reality from present to past, and the branches that feed the leaves will emerge, so to speak. When the branches are traced back to the trunk, and the trunk back to the roots, then like the root of a tree, knock it out and everything around it collapses. To our astonishment, human-associated experiences and core fear appear to operate in exactly the same manner. That is, follow today's current fear back, and after some digging, eventually you will arrive at its core. When the core is raised to the conscious mind for processing, then an amazing transformational process happens. That is, dissolve one major root, and 100 or so surface fears go with it. Furthermore, core fears have rarely been found to bear any resemblance to surface fears, which is why we are not too concerned about Gordon fearing death. Death is a broad term, it is a link back, but it is not Gordon's root core. How do we unearth Gordon's core fear? Again, this can be achieved in two ways. 1. Mentally imagining and then processing exactly the same as he would in real life. 2. Physically enduring boarding a plane, and then working back the fear from the actual real triggered event. Of course, it is a personal choice as to which direction one takes, though our suggestion is always to become apt at the imagining, option 1. As not only do you not need to encounter the real-life event, there is no need to experience a future event either. In other words, it is our opinion that fears manifested into real life are there simply because the sub-unconscious is creating, then projecting them into 3D life and reality. While we realize this is a stark statement that may come under fire or rejection, we ask only that you maintain an open mind on the subject. as without doubt, when all surface fears are traced back, processed and dissolved, then consequently a reality without fear ensues. However, the immediate response is almost always a disassociation and disownment of any physical fears. That is, to hear that you may well indeed be 100% responsible for all your core fears is perhaps a little too much for the mind to bear. Nevertheless, bear in mind that you are trillions of single cells binding together to form that which you see in the mirror. That's right, your reflection of an individual human being is all but 99.9% space, 75% water, with billions of neurons computing trillions upon trillions of possible outcomes. To add even more, 80% of your entire life and reality is being created and maintained from the sub-unconscious self, with a mere 20% in your conscious awareness. With that in mind, you could be responsible for everything, but you just don't know it yet. It's a little like playing spot the difference between two pictures. What the conscious mind is not aware of, it simply cannot process. Nevertheless, it does not mean it does not exist and that you are not responsible for it. Though now back to option 1. There is a great shortcut in the process of unearthing core fears. That is to mentally imagine a current fear, allow whatever emotions to come forward. Feel the emotions, own them, and then consciously seek their original association. Though we are not talking about therapy, hypnotherapy, or psychotherapy. What we are talking about is everyday self-reflection, in a normal awakened state. In simpler terms, whatever the fear, feel it, and seek its original creation. Though contrary to what you may think, the original fear event is never the current one. So here's how it's done. Remember Gordon? Well, now he's sitting comfortably again in a relaxed state of mind. Once again he is tasked to imagine and recall the plane scenario. Though this time, he powers it with all his mind and imagination. With vigor, he imagines the point whereby he flips into real fear, and at that very point, we ask him to stop. While we know he fears death and in stepping onto the plane he might die, as already outlined, this is a trigger and not a core fear. At this point we stop, changing the direction slightly. Now we ask Gordon, what memory can he recall that is triggering this innate fear? At first he said I don't know, until it was posed over and over again. According to the amount of resistance, and in Gordon's case this meant posing the same question 9 times over. Nevertheless, his subconscious eventually come forth. It took 9 times because Gordon has a normal mind in so much that it is well versed in bouncing off and resisting core fears. In a general sense, the average mind will not allow access simply because the mind is itself a tool which has been trained into avoidance. In presenting the same question 9 times over meant the mind has nowhere else to go except answer the question. While it might sound like torture techniques of brainwashing into submitting a confession, it is none other than engaging with the subunconscious, or termed another way, the subtle self. Though the resistance comes from the subtle self simply because it is not accustomed to being consciously interacted with, but assurance is given that with time and effort, future unearthing becomes easier. Anyhow, Gordon spoke of an associated event that was way back in his childhood. And yes, it is almost always located back as far as early childhood. Though what came to his conscious mind was an experience he had totally forgotten. Gordon spoke of being shown images whereby when he was around 5 years old, his father sent him to the bedroom. He went on to speak how during the hot summer nights of being confined to the small room was both uncomfortable and extremely isolating. He went further to speak how sad he felt at hearing his friends outside playing and enjoying themselves while he was locked in his room. Overall, Gordon had associated his containment to a bad experience. When he was young and underdeveloped, can you remember the hippocampus is not mature enough and that the amygdala gland processes emotional content? Well, here lies the fundamental root. Core. That is when Gordon experienced the bedroom scenario. As a child his perception is also young and still in the early stages of forming. This is vitally important because what's perceived when young, embeds itself into the system which then goes on to influence all future related events. That is, when young Gordon's overall consciousness has a choice. How is it going to perceive the bedroom scenario? Will it be good, or not good? It's as simple and as basic as that. For example, and this can easily be tested out for yourself. Imagine a previous event, it can be anything as trivial as a shopping trip. Now think about that trip and how you perceived it. As a general rule, it falls into one of only two categories. Either it gets a tick to say yes, or a strike to say no. Either it is viewed as green for go, or red for no, like or dislike, etc., etc. The point being that each and every experience or event can be narrowed down to one of two words, like, or dislike, good or bad, but the real connector that glues and binds the physical neuron is how you felt about it. In short, perception perceives something as it felt good, or it did not feel good, with everything else just an elaboration of what perception deems as good or not good. Please think about this, and have some fun trying it out. If you have not already done so, you will be amazed at how basic perception really is. Now imagine a child, and ask that child what it thinks about the state of the economy in the USA during the forthcoming year. What do you think that child will respond with? Of course, the child's mind would be bamboozled, wouldn't it? Now ask the same child what it thinks about its parents, and the most likely answer is I like. In a general sense, and unless first taught, a 5-year-old child does not understand the concept of love. The beginnings for most all children, including yourself when you were young, was to first like or not like, right? While it appears humorous, the point is that when very young, perception makes basic decisions of like and dislike, good or bad, etc., etc. Though back to Gordon. Remember, his bedroom scenario happened to him around 5 years old, and although he could not consciously recall it, now at the age of 35 he somehow understands the experience to be not good. Is it then a coincidence that when boarding a plane and feeling fear, that when asked 9 times he consciously recalled this real-life event? And while there is a great deal of dismissiveness surrounding childhood going on to influence and form present-day reality, the reality is that it could not form any other way. If Gordon and anyone who is experiencing inner discomfort accepts ownership and full responsibility of their everything, including childhood. Remarkably, this ensures a fast track towards processing, dissolving and freeing oneself of their core fears. So for Gordon, his perception of original events relating to containment are perceived as not good. Then perception's job thereafter is to store this memory and use it for all future related events. In other words, as Gordon is experiencing real life and reality, his basic perception must choose good or not good. It's as simple as that. Though what makes it choose to hold on to and forget other events is the emotional association. For perception to make the decision of good or not good, it must use one or more of the 5 senses. That is sight, sound, taste, touch, or smell, plus intuition. So when Gordon is thrust into his room, the door closed, and he is now alone listening to his friends playing outside. Then for his perception to store this as not a good experience, then he would have to emotionally connect the event to either what it is he is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching. The connection comes when his intuition, or said another way, his overall consciousness, at that time, feels the event to be good, or not good. Once the feeling is connected to the real-life event, it has an electromagnetic frequency which will pulse and will trigger for each new similar future event. Though did you notice that similar was bolded? This is so because for the brain to trigger the amygdala gland into producing fear, future events need only to be similar and not exact. If you can imagine, your brain is a little like a Google search engine in so much that when you type a word search, it comes back with relevant and not so relevant. Though to be more precise, type in the word present and all the variations from present day, to a gift, to a presentation come back. It may now surprise you to discover the human mind operates in a very similar fashion, insomuch that when Gordon's core fear is called forth, the brain searches on the associated feeling and not the actual event. For example, if Gordon, and it is worth mentioning that only Gordon would be able to recall the feeling which his core fear associated to. While it may have formed in the bedroom, his mind has the ability to recall, bedroom equals fear, box equals fear, containment equals fear, father equals fear, kids playing outside equals fear, and any smells, tastes, touches of fabrics, and the images which he seen at that given moment all equals fear. You may now be thinking it is an impossible task to undo and dissolve core fears, but this is not the case, because the unlock key lies within the associated core feeling and not the other associations. The key to dissolving hundreds, if not thousands of daily fears is to find the associated core emotion of containment equals not good. Though here is one of life's simpler, yet not so public facts. It is always a linked emotion that drives fear, and it is so simply because fear is not a physical or mental construct, but fear is a feeling. All feelings are emotionally driven simply because that is the very nature of their existence. However, for Gordon, the feeling of containment is unprocessed and now considered to be emotional baggage. Why is it unprocessed? Because Gordon's limited conscious awareness was not mature enough to rationalize the event in real time. Just like the child above cannot rationally, or critical analyze the USA economy, at 5 years old, Gordon could not rationally, or critically analyze the bedroom scenario for its truth. While it appears we are leaving the territory of fear, please be assured that we are not. Truth is unbelievably relevant when it comes to holding, manufacturing, processing, and dissolving core fears. Why is this so? Well, can you recall that earlier that universal truths came into the module? Outlined was that it may be your truth, but it is not a truth of the universe. Well, when Gordon stored his real-life experience as not good, it also stores as his truth. Nevertheless, when talking about universal truths and truths of the universe, the truth is that Gordon was not in a position to soak up and analyze the whole truth, so his truth is not a truth of the universe. It is his truth, but he does not know and could not have known the real truth of the situation. The extended truth which Gordon became familiar with later, was that he was sent to the bedroom because his father was experiencing an inability to deal with a naughty boy. Now aged 35, he was also able to rationalize and process that the event was not so bad after all. Eventually he came to the conscious understanding that being within 4 small walls brought no more harm than being outside with his friends, and while he felt injustice at that time, he could now process and let go of that injustice. How did he achieve this? Because when young, processing real-life experiences and events are done so from a single perspective. That is, Gordon could only see and perceive reality from his own point of view. However, when older and he consciously recalls and goes back into the event, then he can process it from varying angles. Though the emphasis is on consciously, for without consciously recalling, reliving and reprocessing the event, then fear could not dissolve. If Gordon could have viewed the bedroom scenario from the same perspective that he could now do at 35, then it is highly unlikely he would have retained the event as a stored and embedded memory. Though the really good news is that no matter the age, yet once consciously recalled and processed, the dissolution occurs. Nevertheless, before we reach the dissolution, let's go back to Gordon boarding the plane. Now he has consciously recalled a childhood event. Is this the end of it? Of course not. What Gordon has achieved is a connection to an associated event. Yet, in order to dissolve and let go, he must first consciously process this event. Although we have spoken briefly about this already, here is how associated events are processed, and let go of. Step 4, processing the unprocessed. All unprocessed events and experiences have some form of association behind them. That is, There has to be a charged emotion of either like, or dislike, good or bad, want or not want. It's as simple and as basic as that. As we have already mentioned, fear holds one electromagnetic frequency, while desire holds another, and it is these locked frequencies that emit and attract a particular signal. Think of it like a radio wave. Radio heart on 99.5 Hz cannot be heard on radio mind on 88.5 Hz and vice versa. The same way, and albeit fear and desire are from the same family, when locked in, no matter what, they continually pulse and emit their own signal to attract their own individual audience. However, there is a twist. Even a not good event can evolve into a good and desirable event. How can this be? Because, as mentioned earlier, the way that the average human dynamic has evolved is such that when a dislikable, not good, unwanted real-life event is experienced, then the sub-unconscious instructs a series of positive, desirable motivating overlays. In a general sense, this is performed automatically and away from one's immediate awareness, and it does this to keep life and reality striving in a forward motion. Though it will not be expanded upon in this module, it is our understanding that there are only ever two outcomes that overall consciousness ponders and makes decisions upon. That is, the following. Is this productive or destructive? If it is productive, then the human system of dynamics moves on, yet if perceived as destructive, then inner dynamics get to work with a series of productive overlays. For example, let's assume you go on a vacation, yet the holiday turns out to be dreadful. What do? Either future vacations are put on hold, which is avoidance through fear, or for the next vacation, it is most likely you will go out of your way to ensure a good time is experienced. While this is quite normal, please delve into the dynamics for a moment. That is, one's overall consciousness strives to create a positive overlay, and while this is just a basic example, the process when forming perception is exactly the same. Though the main difference is that when young, and when emotionally charged, the experienced event becomes a stored memory that embeds itself into the system and then goes on to influence and create current reality. Now remember that the first recalled fear for Gordon was a fear of death. When he thought of boarding the plane, death sprung into his mind. As this is the first layer of fear, it is what Gordon will process first. Now we ask Gordon to step back onto the plane, and connect with the thoughts and feelings of death. In simple terms, we go through the same single-point intensive interrogation questioning as earlier. Gordon is asked. 1. What is it about death that scares you? Gordon replied with, I don't know, I just don't wanna die. The single-point questioning continues. 2. What is it about death you don't want? Gordon replied with, I don't know, I haven't yet achieved what it is I want to achieve. Single-point questioning again. 3. What is it you want to achieve? Gordon replied, I want to be successful and have my own business in life, but this panic and anxiety is getting in the way. 4. What is the anxiety and panic saying to you? Gordon replied, I don't know, but I'm scared I will fail. 5. What is it about failure that frightens you? Gordon replied, I have been taught that failure is not an option and that if I fail, then I am a failure and I don't want to be a failure, so it's better not to do it in the first place. More single-point questioning. 6. If you do not attempt it, how does that make you feel? Gordon replied, if I don't do it, then I've failed. 7. What makes you think and feel that you have failed? Gordon replied, my father told me I was a failure and that I would fail. 8. When did your father tell you this? Gordon replied, when he sent me to the bedroom. He would shout and call me a loser and that I would never be any good at anything. 9. Did you believe him? Gordon replied, yes. 10. Why did you believe him? Gordon replied, I don't know, because I did. 11. Is he right? Gordon replied, yes, because my life is a mess. I wanna change but I can't get rid of the panic and anxiety. 12. Would you believe your father today? Gordon replied, no. 14. Why not? Gordon replied, because I know better. Last single point question. 15. Then why not let it go? Gordon replied, I don't know why, it's just there, always bugging me in the background. Did you hear what Gordon said? It's just there, always bugging me in the background. Wow, all this conversation to get back to what he always knew, had lived with since being young, and a sentence that has played out like an 8-track in the background of his mind. We ask again, is it a coincidence that Gordon can recall the above conversation, memories, and feelings from when he was young? While we would like to say yes, it is not just pure chance, as the recalling is very poignant indeed. As we can glean from the above, Gordon fears death, but death is the byproduct and not the actual root core of his fears. Furthermore, we can see that Gordon's life and reality today is being heavily influenced from experiences when he was 5 years old. Yet to get there, took a series of peeling off the overlays. If we do not strip back the overlays, the conscious mind will only ever answer the surface questions. Now, as bizarre as this might sound, Gordon is first asked the following. If you stepped on a plane and death became you, what then? Gordon replied, I don't know, I suppose it will all be over. What will be over? Gordon replied, I don't know, I mean this shitty, fearful, horrible existence. Okay. Gordon, allow yourself to board the plane and die. Gordon replied, I'm scared to die, and I cannot do it. Step onto the plane, Gordon. At this point, this is potentially the biggest subjective step Gordon may ever take in his entire life. As Gordon steps onto the plane, and as fear engulfed, his whole body went into panic mode. He sweated profusely, trembled, and his heart was racing wildly. Yet to his amazement, death did not become him. As death does not become, and he stays with the fear, he is encouraged to connect and feel whatever it is that comes up. To his surprise, surfacing was images, sounds, and more importantly feelings he had not felt since their inception. Consciously he was reliving experiences of 5 years old, younger, and even some that were older. It was like opening Pandora's box, as the relive felt as real as the original events. Nevertheless, and on this occasion, he stayed with the fear. Once the fear subsided, Gordon could rationally connect boarding the plane to his childhood bedroom experience, yet other events appeared to bear no relevance. This is not the case, but as outlined earlier, all fears feed from fear, and it does not need to be an identical event. For example, as Gordon felt and perceived containment as not good, then any and all future events relating to containment could act as a trigger. That is, he may experience containment being stuck in a job, in a plane, in a car, at the zoo, or it could show up elsewhere such as a holiday, a cinema, or anything that could associate the feeling of containment. The boarding the plane is just a trigger. However, now that he has an associated real-life past core event, to completely dissolve, unpicking that event is required. Though not a cop-out, once the root core event is raised to the conscious self, then the process of unpicking happens naturally. That is, over the coming days and weeks Gordon will experience images, feelings, tastes, smells, pertaining to the original event that will rationally and logically unwind themselves. How does this happen? Because once something is raised to the conscious mind, then it naturally processes itself based on current and not past perception. In brief, instead of analyzing from a single angle, which was all perception could do when young, the same event is processed using a variety of rationale and logic. The upshot being that once processed to the universal truth, then the negatively attached emotion of not feeling good dissolves with it. This happens because, like Gordon, today he is much wiser, more knowledgeable, and able to view things from various perspectives, something which during the formation of the original event, he was unable to do. Though how does he know that all surface fears relate back and are hidden in childhood? The short answer is, that he doesn't and doesn't have to. What matters is he follows fear back like in the example above. Where there is a strong dislike, or strong desire, then you can be almost certain there is an associated core experience driving it. Nevertheless, until it is pulled forward to the conscious self, then it will go on driving and influencing reality. However, what's really keeping that core fear in place is the unexpressed emotion. As when young, rarely can emotions be processed simply because the brain is not mature enough. Therefore, and to have to recall the event to relive and process once more, is a somewhat natural occurrence. You might now be confused and wondering why it is that humans are designed this way. Well, we cannot give you this answer, though what we can say is that like other axial periods, humanity as a whole appears to be experiencing a similar dynamic. Jasper's Origins of History, 1953, is a whole book dedicated to the axial period, which roughly translates into certain periods in history where global synchronistic events and leaps forward in consciousness occurred simultaneously without each continent having any knowledge of. In other words, prior to logic was pre-logic. Yet when logic dawned the world, it did so without each continent communicating with each other. What does this have to do with the dynamics of fear? Well, unless we are seriously mistaken, there is a global shift of human consciousness underway right now, which roughly translates into awareness being aware of itself. Though there is not enough word space in this module to cover the shift in awareness, fear appears to come into that shift. Though what is really being said is that although the world looks to be in quite a mess right now, it is nothing more than collective fear consciously raising, processing and dissolving itself. When brought down to the level of individualism, it signals the conscious ability to raise, relive, process, and dissolve all core fears. While we cannot tell you why it is humans are born with such limitations, there is more than enough quantifiable proof to suggest that some of these limitations are now being lifted from humanity. Though please do spend some time observing and delving into your own core fears, else the opportunity to live free may indeed pass you by. Step 5, Allowing fear to rise and dissolve. If you have got this far in the module, then you will also have reached a point whereby you are now becoming apt at flying your own plane, so to speak. Oh, yes. Did it slip our attention to inform you that you are not really the co-pilot, but in fact you are the pilot of your own consciousness? Of course we did not forget, for we knew that you would work this out for yourself. By now, you will have a good idea of how to observe, identify, unearth, and break apart core fears, which are really just associated real-life past experiences that have been limitedly perceived as not good. Though what about fears you cannot trace back, and cannot find the origins in your own life and reality? Well, as it was said earlier, prior to 3 to 5 years old, it is not normally possible to consciously recall something that there is no stored memory of. Nevertheless, and in the 10 years plus of unearthing and dissolving core fears, our experience has discovered a phenomenon. That is, when you begin the process of intently but consciously raising all known and unknown core fears, then the remarkable and unexplainable process begins. Some individuals are able to raise and relive fears that do not belong to this life at all, and while we have no knowledge of past or previous lives, allowing the associated experience to rise, process and dissolve is absolutely essential. Furthermore, and when consciously calling forward core fears, it is not unusual to experience severe insecurity, low self-esteem, deep fear, paranoia, and a whole host of physical elements such as tummy aches, very loose bowels, and strong headaches. It is our experience and opinion that this is embedded energies breaking up, dissolving and releasing themselves. Section 9, The Waxing and Waning of Fear. It is also our understanding that all fears are a human dynamic of duality which are subject to the general principles of waxing and waning. In other words, Fear is not to be totally annihilated, for without it, one may indeed bring themselves to an untimely end. Nevertheless, as we live in a world of duality, that's hot and cold, night and day, left and right, up and down, the list is endless. Yet, as we exist in duality, then to accept, welcome and embrace fear and love, or fear and desire, whichever way you relate to it, is an integral aspect of life. However, duality and coming to the awareness that fear is an important and valued aspect, not only reduces it, but contains fear in its rightful place. For example, let's go back to the roller coaster and talk to a few of the crowd. Some advocated they felt extreme fear, others extreme excitement, and others in between. Though all agreed to a degree, the roller coaster triggered fear. Can you see that when fear is grouped collectively, it weaves through, waxing and waning? In other words, and in the case of the roller coaster, fear does not dominate, but neither does excitement. Though this may come as a total surprise, your whole existence is founded upon the exact same principle. That is, and as mentioned before, consciousness itself is always in a state of flux, going through the same stages of waxing and waning. Therefore, one day you may feel more fear than the next, and vice versa, but it does not necessarily mean you are full of fear. What it means is that, like the heat from the sun, the energy of fear is passing through the same way. The difference being that, when fear passes through, unlike the sun that dans, fear will feed from your own core fears. Dissolve core fears, and fear has nothing to grapple onto. Therefore, when the collective energy of fear arises, it will not penetrate to the core. A real example of hidden core fear. Arthur came to us with what he thought was a strange symptom. Irrespective of his keenness to learn a second language of Chinese, every time he attended a lesson, he experienced a headache. Though, not only that, he spoke of many teachers that at the 11th hour had, for no apparent reason, let him down. After 5 years of being inside China and doing what he thought his best to study Chinese, in his own words, he felt that his language learning was going nowhere. Albeit Arthur could speak around 400-500 words, he was struggling with the structure and grammar, and was by no means fluent. To cap it all, Arthur stated that every time he attempted to learn, somehow something got in the way. In other words, he had consciously become aware, noting that there was an uncanny connection to things going wrong when a Chinese lesson was due. Cutting a long story short, and when worked backwards, here's what Arthur discovered. Consciously he did indeed have a passion to learn the language of Chinese, and irrespective of the hurdles, he had dedicated more time than most. However, as we worked back, it became apparent to Arthur that at his subtle levels of reality, he felt Chinese were difficult people, and his experience of living and working in China did not hold the most positive track record. Back even further, and it was discovered that Arthur held on to a concept of rebirth and reincarnation. Further back, and Arthur raised to his conscious self that he believed in past and future life positioning. In other words, and albeit he was not at all conscious of the following, yet sub-unconsciously Arthur's consciousness had somehow associated a belief that if he became fluent in Chinese, then it would identify and assign him to China. Arthur was holding on to what might appear a strange concept, that if he became fluent in Chinese, then he was one of them. If he was one of them, then perhaps he would be reborn there. As this was something that Arthur deeply feared, his overall consciousness got to work creating a diversion. Is it then any wonder he experienced cancelled lessons, teachers falling ill, himself falling ill, language books mysteriously going missing, headaches, scrambled mind thinking, etc., etc. Though the really neat aspect of all this is that whatever Arthur feared at the core, his reality reflected it into real life 3D. Some say this is just coincidence, others refer to it as synchronicity, and some say it is a projection of consciousness. Though we are not suggesting one thing or another, please give it some open-minded thought, and allow your own conscious awareness to make its own decisions. Contrary to some beliefs, in our understanding, Arthur is not mental, or suffering a neurological disorder. He is simply living out the reality of being human. It is also our understanding that while Arthur is a very active and successful C.E.O, he is far from in touch with his own inner dynamics. Though once raised to his conscious mind, processed, and allowed to dissolve, Arthur's reality took a turn for the better. Did he become fluent and live happily ever after? No, the truth was that in dissolving his core fear, that is which was a fear of becoming Chinese, he came to the rational assumption that fluency would not improve his life and situation any more than it has done already. Knowing enough Chinese to get around China, and being in a demanding role of a CEO, he chose to employ fluency and spend his time elsewhere. The point being, that the above is a true story, and while for obvious reasons Arthur will remain anonymous, he was genuinely enamored at the change in his reality. As he no longer feared becoming Chinese, he was better able to integrate into China, at the same time spend more quality time at home with his wife and children. Yet how could he do this, and how could one small fear have such a bearing upon his daily life and reality? Well, do you remember earlier that Gordon spoke of an 8-track mind looping in a voice that he wasn't even aware of until question 15, then why not let it go? Gordon replied, I don't know why, it's just there, always bugging me in the background. Well, Arthur, like most all, experience inner loops of self-chatter that are mostly ignored, dismissed, and pushed aside. The reality is that they do, and in our experience they are normal and are what's influencing and driving reality. Nevertheless, the longer one pretends they don't exist, is to the extent core fears drive life and reality. Section 10, the practical application of this module. Now we have pretty much covered fear from beginning to end, and now we are going to recap and condense the whole module. Whatever your position in life, though if like 85% of the world's population who were born into poverty, or 95% born into less than affluent surroundings, then at some core level, there is more than a good probability that core fears are driving your life. Though what if you happen to be at the top end of humanity and were fortunate enough to be within the top 5% born abundantly, does that release you from fear? No, it does not. Fear, like all human energy, does not discriminate, and it can arrive and leave at any time in life. Having said that and meant in a general sense only, unattended core fears express themselves more as life matures. Yet, why is this so? Because they become compounded and overlaid so many times, that the conscious self loses all contact with the inner self, eventually being driven by core fears. Though is it a coincidence that in today's Western world, 75%–90% of all doctor visits are due to stress? And that 47% of all individuals will at some point take antidepressants? Furthermore, and when applied to the workplace, stress, which is really just another term for core fear, is responsible for an average of 15 days per year being taken off per employee. Can we describe these factual statistics as signs of a healthy and normal life, and can fear really be ignored, pushed out, and pretended it doesn't exist? Let us now begin the Pisces assistance, and take a practical walkthrough from beginning to end. Begin with an open mind that the very nature of life and reality means naturally being subject to fear. Accepting that you as an individual may indeed be driven by core fear is perhaps the biggest initiation of all. Though to help, please think back and know that whatever happened as a child, happened out of your control, and prior to 5 years old, there will be no conscious recall anyway. What does this mean? Well, as you cannot possibly be held consciously responsible, then it lets you off the hook, so to speak. However, make a note we said consciously, and that at some point later on, it is both beneficial and speeds up the process when one takes full responsibility for all that they are, and that includes all known and unknown core fears. Nevertheless, begin with intent, as if you are not fully intent, and this module is read like a book, then it simply will not work. This is not a disclaimer, it is to highlight that one of the dynamics that guide life and reality to be what it is conscious intent. The conscious intent required is to achieve intent behind the intent. Imagine the following scenario. Imagine intending to eat lunch, but for whatever reason you skip it. Maybe an important meeting, project, deadline, target, or goal took precedent, and there was no option but to skip lunch. Now think again. Yes, you intended to eat lunch, but overlaying this surface intent were more important work-related issues. Therefore, and on this occasion, intent took second place. Most likely, fear gained the presidential prime spot, and work just had to come first. Not to say this is wrong. In fact, it may have been totally justifiable. However, this is an analogy only to highlight the powers and weaknesses of intent. Intent behind the intent would go something like this. Now imagine being in a desert. 2 days pass without food, water, and any form of civilization. Now, your life seriously depends on surviving, though survival relies not only on innate instincts, but the intent behind the intent. In other words, when life depends on it, to the exclusion of all else, the intent behind the intent is to survive. The only thoughts that permeate the mind are thoughts of survival. Though driving these innate thoughts are the energy of intent. To the exclusion of all else, the intent behind the intent is to survive. This is what's meant by intent behind the intent, and this is the intent required to clear core fears. In other words, read it like a book and it will most likely collect dust thereafter, but this is not a book, it is a module, right? Read with the intent of a result, and there will be a result. Read it more than once, because that's when the power of the contents really sink in and digest. So begin with observing, observe both what's on the outside, and also looping around on the inside. That is, look at what it is you are first being presented with in reality. Do you have a few, a lot, or is your life steeped in fear? Though when we say fear, this could be felt as insecurity, frustration, anxiety, depression, confusion, even tragedy. Then ask yourself, what is it that your inner self-chatter is relaying to you? Remember, the scenario for Arthur was such that he consciously could not grasp what it was that was creating a dysfunctional reality, but it was in fact his very own self-chatter from a core fear. Pay attention to your own self-chatter and what is bugging your own mind. Observe every adverse and negative event, paying as much attention to your own actions and reactions as possible. Remember, even a positive smile can be the result of a core fear being covered up. Watch out for fear partnering with desire, in so much that strong desires often lead back to core fears. Fear and desire can be thought of as demotivation versus self-motivation. It is the same energy, only with a different name, at differing ends of the pole. Approach this with fun and you will be amazed at the connection. Test out the practice of you can only ever have what you want, when you no longer want it, yet if you struggle to get your head around the concept, then there is a module, Getting What You Want Now, Transforming Inner Resistance, to help you better understand. Transform desires into preferences. Or better stated, let go of desire, and preferences will emerge. As when in a position of you can take it or leave it, then the universe can bring to you that which you prefer. Follow your actions and reactions back to their source, asking your conscious mind for help. Maintain a single point of questioning, which may appear torture-like, yet don't worry about these ethics as you are only questioning yourself, then nobody will attempt to sue you. Bear in mind that the average mind is like a bank vault, and following the module from beginning to end will locate and unlock this vault. Also, be fully prepared for what comes forth. Earlier it was said that when you look for your own bigger picture, the details, and then the finer daily details, even some golden nuggets would emerge. Though what are these nuggets and how do you identify them? They are associated real-life events, even unlived, that can be linked through to each other. In other words, it might go something like this. Only during Chinese language lessons would Arthur get a headache. Initially he assumed the headache to be a physical ailment, until the regularity entered his consciousness. Traced back, the headache could be deemed a diversion, especially when he linked other associated events also preventing him from studying. Back even further, Arthur discovered that his negative experiences had altered his perception of China, and that he was holding on to a sub-unconscious dislike. Back even more, and he unearthed deeply rooted beliefs that integrating too much would deem him Chinese. Deep and well away from his conscious mind was a fear that he could indeed be reborn into a dislikable land that he had associated himself with. Though at the core was nothing to do with China at all. Everything from the headache back are triggers to Arthur's core fear. That was, he feared the future, which indicates he had no trust, and was driven by an unquantifiable belief. So what is Arthur's ultimate core fear? Fear of the unknown. While some people feel excitement from the unknown, others fear it, and they fear it because their past experiences of encountering the unknown has been perceived as not good. Therefore, and as you may have already worked out, fear becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. Yet pick apart the associations, and the emotion that is attached to the event, and fear will naturally dissolve. Although there is no number, when the critical mass of one's core fears have been dissolved, then the remarkable inner transformation happens. That is, an awareness develops that there is no separation from their outer world. In that, hope turns to trust, and core fears become a thing of the past. It does not mean that you will never feel fear again, though it does mean fear will not sub-unconsciously drive from the core. Additionally, and when the critical mass is dissolved, any new incoming fears undergo immediate processing. In so much that they are dealt with, and let go of. That way, fear has nothing to hold on to. Though the most practical aspect of this entire module is to spare you from living out and experiencing real-life fears. Did you get that? What we are suggesting is processing reality, so that future fears do not happen in real life. Is this even possible? Well, while it is not yet scientifically quantifiable, we are edging closer to conclusively demonstrating what does and does not construct fear. In short, let's go back to the imagined watcher, actor, and projector in the cinema. We begin with the knowledge that it is quite normal to conceive and believe that everything in your reality is real, separate from you, and that it is really happening around you. Though, when fear is addressed on the inside, that is, subjectively processed, then the objective, that is your external world, reflects this. In other words, change the inside and the outer will show a different movie. Nevertheless, we are not going to leave you with a sentence to frustrate your mind, so let's get down to a real-life scenario. Imagine a fear, big or small, yet one that's been bugging you on and off. Though the emphasis is on imagine, we do not mean regression or psychotherapy. In your normal everyday state of wakefulness, grab a quiet moment, and pick out a fear of your own. Though to help, allow us to highlight a real-life example. On a Friday afternoon, Isabel experienced a very tense dispute with her boss. The disagreement was financial and Isabel's patience was wearing thin. As she left the office, and by text, the tension raged well into the weekend. As her boss was in the habit of humiliating, Isabel felt that Monday would not only be her last day, but it would also be a day where her dignity would come under fire. On Sunday, even though Isabel was not a believer, she feared this future event so much, that she put herself forward for consciously processing her inner fears. The following is an exact account of what happened. Isabel was asked to consciously engage, and no matter what, she was asked to engage and imagine Monday as though Monday was really here. She was asked to connect to and engage in every imagined thought, scenario, and feeling that she thought might happen. Here is what came up. So Isabel. Monday has arrived, You get to the office and now what? Isabel, I don't want to go because I'm already nervous. Single point questioning, what are you nervous of? Isabel, she's a bitch because I just know she will make fun of me in front of other people. Imagine that humiliation. Imagine exactly what she will say, the actions she will take, the textures around you, the people in the office. Imagine as much humiliation coming your way as you possibly can. Really imagine it. At this point, Isabel began to cry. She did not speak, but cried with passion. What is it? Isabel, I just know what she will say, how she will speak, and I hate the bitch. Why do you hate her? Isabel, because she's always a bitch, and never sees anything the way others do. She thinks she knows everything, but she doesn't, and everyone hates her. Okay, allow your boss to say and do whatever it is you think she will do. Just imagine and allow her to humiliate the way you think she will. Again, and at this point, Isabel cried even more. What is it? Isabel, I feel like shit, it really hurts. What hurts? Isabel, to be spoken down, and to have the crap taken out of me the way she does. Okay, Isabel, connect to that feeling and feel all the hurt, all the humiliation, and all the crap. Connect to it and feel it all. Feel it, feel it, feel it all. At this point Isabel was crying so much, the pain could be seen rolling down her face. Isabel, ask yourself why it is you feel hurt, and pain from being humiliated. Isabel, my mum always told us what to do, and the public showers made me feel humiliated. I remember when I was 9, my mum took me to the public showers and spoke to me the same way. As a young girl, I felt terrible showering naked in communal showers, and it has stayed with me all this time. Now the following was put to Isabel. So what if you are humiliated? Look around the showers, everyone is showering and they are not too interested in you. Now think that your mum took you to these showers not for humiliation, but to keep you clean. The fact that you did not like the public, the cold, the showers, was what your perception was telling you at the time, but is this the way you really see it now? When you look back now, how do you feel about it? Isabel, it still hurts, but yes, I can see why mum took us there. I just didn't like it, that's all. But I do understand she was only trying to keep us clean. As Isabel's crying began to subside, her rational self begins the process of re-evaluating old associated experiences that hold on to unprocessed emotions, which in turn go on to create and live out real-life fears. The point being that Isabel must consciously connect and process the unprocessed feeling, which is really just an emotional reaction to that event, which then goes on to fuel and propel future events. Albeit this was Sunday, as Isabel had consciously dug up and relived an embedded fear, then the prediction was that it could no longer manifest into reality. That is, as long as she has unpicked the emotional pain from the original experience. Monday came and Isabel did not experience any of what she had feared for over the weekend. In fact, she spoke of how bizarrely calm her boss was. Though the reality is that the situation still remained, nevertheless, the fear had dissolved. And while it could be said that this was just a coincidence, if you try this out for yourself with similar results, then you will know for sure there is something more to it. Therefore, as the watcher in the cinema, you are going to screen and play the fear. As the actor, you are then going to step in the screen and become that fear. Then as the projector, you will take the conscious interaction from both the actor and the watcher, and you will change the future of your own real-life movie. So imagine a fear that's been bugging you for a while, and in the quietness of the moment, bring that fear to the front of your mind. You could be walking in the street, sitting on a bus, even watching the TV, it really doesn't matter. Just bring what it is you would not normally bring, because as humans, we have been conditioned to not think about things that were considered bad. However, this is the key. As avoidance, ignoring, or pretending the fear does not exist, only pushes it further and deeper into the subunconscious, yet be assured, it does not go away. No matter how strange the fear is, it could be a feared death of a close one, a fear of something bad or tragic happening. It could be sexual, weird and wacky. Yet as it's only your imagination, it really doesn't matter. Bring it to the front and power it up in full color. Do not avoid the nasty, sad, or depressive bits. Imagine it as though it was really happening. When you have the full imagery, then dig into the way you feel about it. Do all you can to connect the way you feel and bring up whatever painful, negative, hurtful emotion there is. If there isn't one, then keep asking, because this is a sure sign that the subunconscious is doing all it can to prevent the original hurt from arising. As sure as day breaks and the sun rises, eventually the associated pain will surface. You may cry, feel sad, hurt, frustrated, depressed, insecure, panicky, etc., etc., yet feel it. Feel it all. Connect to and feel it, feel it, feel it. In doing so, original associated experiences will begin to arise, and if they do not float up instantly, allow them time, they will come. In the doing, and in the reliving sets off a series of biochemical changes. In turn these reflect in your neurological makeup, which in turn pulse and emit a change in your overall Hertz frequency. In this, reality on the outer begins to reflect these changes as what you no longer vibrate and resonate in, you can no longer reflect and live out. And so it is that we have now reached the end of this module, and trust that you have found the information to be fresh and helpful. May we now take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time, effort and expenditure required to apply this module. End. Thank you. Beyond Time Leans are the uber cool transformative feel-good modules from Beyond Time Leans. Rise light, fresh and shine with an X factor, transforming the motivation. I can't do it, yes you can, transforming fear. Rise and shine, it's rainbow time, transform adversity, and wake up each day ready to take on the world. Getting what you want now. Transforming inner resistance. One overall consciousness refers to the commonly understood three levels of consciousness plus. That is the conscious self, the subconscious self, the UN conscious self and one's own interactive intuition. However, for simplicity and ease of understanding we group all these levels of human consciousness into one sum total called overall consciousness. Overall consciousness literally means everything that you are within your reality, which includes self-chatter, internal dialogue, a deity, physical, and non-physical awareness. To www.cdc.gov/ncpddd/id/data.html 3 http://www.cdc.gov/ncpddd/id/research.html 4 http://www.dailymail.co.uk/news/article 441304/thegreatedmyth.html 5 http://www.nice.org.uk/nicemedia/pdf/adguideline.pdf 6 http://www.networks.nhs.uk/nhs networks/eastern pediatric epilepsy network/documents/tick%20 disorder%20 leaflet.pdf 7 http://fod.hhs.gov/watwedo/eaps/ss30 4%20 stress%20 management%20 source.pdf 8 When suicide is outlined as the final expression, there is no suggestion that this is absolute. What is being emphasized is an understanding only that unattended imbalance's final expression can result is suicide. 9 http://spots.wasl.edu/spots%20 manual %20 final /spots %20 manual %204 20 learning %20 strategies.pdf 10 http://www.biopsychiatry.com/amygdala.htm 11 Though please be mindful what it is you wish to change, as for those that wish to magic someone back into their life, particularly where the person has departed the earth, this is an impossible request. At the same time, it is also a direct reflection and an opportunity to unearth and identify one's inner core fears. In other words, where an individual has been separated from another in an untimely fashion. This is an indicator of a significant and somewhat major core fear. 12 http://www.nomadicmat.com/travelblogs/whyamericans.travel overseas/ 13 http://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/infrasound 14 http://educateyourself.org/love frequency 14 oct11.shtml